Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. 3 8-year-old boys, Steve Branch, Christopher Byers, and Michael Moore, vanished while riding their bikes in West Memphis, Arkansas, on May 5, 1993. The following day, their bodies were discovered. However, the investigation took a convoluted and fruitless turn after receiving a false tip about local teenagers. How did misdirection in the case permanently change the course of justice? And what actually happened to these boys? Would justice be served to the victims, or would the case go unresolved? John Mark Byers called the West Memphis police at 8 p.m. on May 5, 1993 to report his son Christopher missing. The officer was informed by him and his spouse Melissa that Chris had not been seen since approximately 5:30 p.m. while he was in the yard working. 2 more parents called in with similar concerns within the next 90 minutes. Steve Branch left for school that day, and Pamela Hobbs said she hadn't seen him since. Around 6 o'clock in the evening, according to Dana Moore, her son Michael had gone out with friends, but had skipped dinner at home. A search was conducted in Robin Hood Hills, where local children frequently played, after 3 missing boys were reported missing. No sign of the boys was discovered that night, despite a thorough search. Chief Inspector Gary Gitchell took over the search the following morning, May 6, 1993. Officer Steve Jones noticed a black tennis shoe floating in a ditch close to the Blue Beacon car wash in the early afternoon. Within 15 minutes, Sergeant Mike Allen found the bodies of 3 young boys who had been murdered in Robin Hood Hills: Steve Branch, Michael Moore, and Chris Byers. In a drainage ditch, the 3 boys were discovered naked, their hands and feet bound with their own shoelaces. Nearby, their clothing was discovered entangled in mud and tree sticks. Christopher Byers suffered from severe genital injuries, including mutilation. Moore and Branch died from multiple injuries and drowning, while Byers' official cause of death was multiple injuries. Because there was insufficient evidence, the police's initial suspicion of rape was later refuted by expert testimony. A pair of pants recovered from the scene contained trace amounts of sperm DNA. Byers' injuries, according to the prosecution, were caused by a purposeful knife attack and castration. However, defense experts contended that rather than a human attack, the injuries on the body were probably caused by animals after they died. The only victim with drugs in his body was Byers. Ritalin, a drug for ADHD, was prescribed to him in January 1993. Nevertheless, the initial autopsy report misidentified the medication as carbamazepine and noted a dosage that was less than what was recommended. Surprisingly little evidence was found at the crime scene on May 5, 1993, despite the heinous nature of the crime. The absence of blood and fibers perplexed the police, who also observed that the area appeared to have been cleaned. They had to deal with a well-known case that attracted national attention, but they had few leads to help them find the person or people responsible. Terry Hobbs, Steve Branch's stepfather, broke down in tears as Gitchell came to the group of people gathered at the edge of the woods to break the terrible news. The town was shocked by the crime's savagery, which prompted an immediate investigation. In this instance, the notion of a satanic connection emerged for a number of reasons. The community was horrified by the gruesome details of the crime, including the castration and the placement of the bodies. The crime scene's remote location further heightened the anxiety. Media reports frequently contributed to the widespread fear of satanic rituals in the United States in the early 1990s. Many communities were especially vulnerable to these fears, particularly those with strong religious convictions. The combination of local beliefs, the graphic nature of the crime, and media coverage made people believe it might be connected to a cult, even though there was no concrete proof of satanic activity in West Memphis at the time. More rational explanations, like the possibility that the boys were harmed by a person they knew, were frequently eclipsed by this suspicion. Chief Inspector Gary Gitchell's announcement that the police were looking into a number of theories, including cult activity, fueled the fire. This preliminary inquiry sparked controversy, resulting in erroneous convictions and posing significant doubts regarding the validity of the evidence and the participants' intentions. 3 young men, Jason Baldwin, Damian Eckles, and Jessie Mskelly Jr., were soon identified as suspects by investigators, and the pursuit of answers permanently altered their lives. A local teen with a problematic past was Damien Eckles. He was a 17-year-old high school dropout who was well known for his sinister hobbies and mental health issues, which included severe depression. He was a prime suspect in the case because of his unusual appearance, which included tattoos, long hair, and black clothes. Because of his interactions with Eckles, Jerry Driver, a juvenile probation officer in Crittenden County, also thought that there was a satanic cult in the area. In the past, Eckles had exhibited erratic conduct, including threatening his father, his ex-girlfriend, and her new boyfriend. Eckles had a history of mental health problems, including being put on suicide watch during his stay in a mental health facility in Oregon. He had additional difficulties in juvenile detention after returning to Arkansas, which ultimately resulted in his hospitalization in Little Rock. He kept going to therapy even after being freed, and he made disturbing claims that he wanted to follow infamous criminals like Charles Manson. Jerry Driver was extremely troubled by these remarks and grew to believe that Eckles was responsible for the killings. Eckles was close friends with another suspect, Jason Baldwin. They were both viewed as social misfits. Despite Baldwin's academic success and his lack of interest in magic, they connected because they had both felt alienated. Eckles had previously been charged with shoplifting, and Baldwin had previously been arrested for vandalism. Baldwin, on the other hand, demonstrated drawing ability, and one of his instructors urged him to study graphic design in college. Jessie Mskelly Jr., the third suspect, had little to no relationship to Baldwin or Eckles. He was notorious for getting into fistfights with other teenagers at school and for having a short fuse. Like Eckles, Mskelly had left high school, but Baldwin was still doing well in school. Damien Eckles was questioned by police several times between May 7 and May 10, both at his residence and at the police station. During these sessions, Eckles repeatedly asserted that he knew nothing about the boys and called the killer sick. Eckles maintained that on the evening of May 5 he was at home chatting on the phone with friends, but when he implied that the murderer was probably a local, it sparked questions about his personal involvement. Even though Eckles cooperated with the police, the results of his polygraph suggested that he might have been lying or deceiving, which fueled more conjecture. Investigators also focused on Jason Baldwin, who denied any misconduct, but they kept examining both teenagers. When local waitress Vicky Hutchison stated that she thought the killings were connected to a cult, the case took a different turn. She was keen to help the police and advised them that she could make friends with Eckles in order to conduct additional investigation. Mskelly got to know Eckles when he worked as a babysitter for Vicky Hutchison. After introducing him to Eckles, Hutchison started questioning Mskelly about the case. Mskelly reportedly joined Hutchison at an occult event, or sabbat, where she observed strange rituals and sexual activities involving young people. As a result, Mskelly was taken to the police station to be questioned. When Aaron, Hutchison's son, stated that he had gone to the woods with the killed boys and said he had witnessed 5 men acting strangely, the matter became more complicated. This added complexity to a story that was already unreliable due to inconsistencies. Her answers to the police's polygraph test showed that she was telling the truth. Chief Inspector Gary Gitchell and his team made the decision to question Jessie Mskelly Jr., a suspect in the killings of the 3 young West Memphis boys, on June 3, 1993. About 9 in the morning, they came up to him. The $35,000 reward for information that could result in arrests was highlighted. Jessie denied having anything to do with the killings during the polygraph examination. Detective Bill Durham thought he was lying, though. After being interrogated extensively, Jessie finally stated that he, Jason Baldwin, and Damien Eckles were responsible for the killings. The officer yelled at him and insisted he knew more than he was confessing, according to Jessie's later account. He found it difficult to claim his innocence and started repeating what the detectives had told him. Gitchell corrected him when he wrongly claimed that the boys were bound with rope, stating instead that they were bound with shoelaces. As a result, Jessie altered his account to fit the officer's specifics. Jessie was questioned for hours before her confession was captured on tape. He stated, "Damien hit Chris Byers and Jason assaulted Steve Branch," claiming to have seen what happened in Robin Hood Hills. Soon after, Deputy Prosecutor John Fogelmill requested warrants to search Jason, Damien, and Jessie's residences. All 3 were taken into custody and accused of capital murder by 10:30 p.m. At a press conference the following morning, Gitchell affirmed his strong belief in the case. Damian Eckles was 18, Jason Baldwin was 16, and Jessie Mskelly Jr. was 17 when they were taken into custody. Judge David Burnett held a pretrial hearing in Marion, Arkansas, on August 4, 1993. He made the decision to try Jessie Mskelly apart from Jason Baldwin and Damian Eckles. Additionally, even though the defense claimed Jessie's confession was coerced, the judge permitted it to be used as evidence. The defense brought up a number of coercive strategies that the police employed while questioning Jessie. They pointed out how officers rejected his claims and showed a diagram that implied he might either be a member of the murderer's circle or work with them. A disturbing audio recording of Aaron saying, "Nobody knows what happened but me," was also brought to light. In a landmark decision, the judge determined that all three defendants would face adult trials. This ruling raised the stakes in a case that was already garnering national attention and sparking debates about the treatment of young suspects in the legal system. Mskelly claimed he tried to cooperate without realizing the repercussions of his remarks because he was perplexed by the police's actions. The three boys were still being held while the defense and prosecution got ready for trial. Blood was discovered on a knife that had belonged to Chris Byers' stepfather, John Mark Byers, during the evidence collection process. The blood on this knife matched that of Chris and Mark, and it had been given away soon after the killing. The police did not pursue this lead, though. The night the boys vanished, a local restaurant employee also claimed to have seen a confused man covered in blood and mud. Despite gathering samples, the police never pursued this lead and eventually lost the evidence after the man left blood smears in the restroom. Mskelly withdrew his confession and refused to repeat his previous statements, despite the prosecutor's intention for him to testify against Eckles and Baldwin. Baldwin and Eckles' trials began on February 28, 1994. As Judge Burnett, Prosecutor Fogelman, and the defense teams determined what evidence could be presented to the jury, both trials received significant media coverage and encountered legal difficulties. A jury consisting of 5 men and 7 women heard Jessie Mskelly Jr.'s trial in Corning, Arkansas on January 18, 1994. Although Prosecutor John Fogelman acknowledged that Jessie's confession contained inconsistencies, he asserted that these were caused by Jessie's attempt to minimize his involvement in the killings. He maintained that Jessie had relationships with Jason Baldwin and Damian Eckles. Dan Stidham, the defense lawyer, retorted that Jessie was unfairly singled out because of pressure to make arrests. He claimed that the investigation was skewed by what he referred to as the Damian Eckles tunnel vision. Stidham maintained that he was afraid while being questioned and that Jessie's confession was coerced. When the mothers of the 3 murdered boys testified about their final moments with their sons on May 5, 1993, the trial became emotional. Because he was concerned that it might annoy judges who felt sorry for the bereaved families, Stidham decided against asking that line of inquiry. The prosecution's version of events was unsettling. Investigators explained how the boys' bodies were painfully found during the search for them. In the courtroom, the jury noticed the boys' bicycles leaning against a wall. The mood was solemn, as Fogelman displayed more than 30 gory images of the corpses. As more unsettling pictures were displayed, pathologists talked about the autopsy results. Jessie appeared extremely at ease throughout the lengthy interrogation, according to Inspector Gary Gitchell. The jury was silent when Fogelman played a recording of Jessie's 34-minute confession to support his argument. Jessie's statements showed significant inconsistencies during cross-examination. The evidence did not support his claims that the boys were bound with brown rope and that the killings occurred at noon. Detective Gitchell claimed that Jessie's confusion was the cause of these mistakes because they were concerned that Aaron Hutchison's story might be discredited. The prosecution decided not to call him. Vicky, his mother, was called instead, and she talked about her quest for justice. She maintained that her concern for the boys drove her, not the $35,000 reward. Jessie's statements revealed some serious contradictions during cross-examination, particularly with regard to the dates of the murders. Aaron Hutchison, a crucial eyewitness, was not called to testify by the prosecution. Rather, they introduced his mother, who spoke about her attempts to get the boys justice. Regarding tangible proof, Jessie's involvement in the crime was not demonstrated by any signs. Regarding certain fibers discovered close to the bodies, a crime lab specialist testified. She subsequently explained, though, that those fibers might have originated from more than just Jessie. Stidham was worried about Jessie's low IQ, so he decided not to have him testify. Rather, he called a polygraph examiner to discuss false confessions in an attempt to raise reasonable doubt. The judge permitted the examiner to describe the pressures that can cause someone to make a false confession, but he decided that the polygraph results could not be used. In his defense testimony, social psychologist Dr. Richard Offshee discussed how Jessie's confession was impacted by police pressure. He was permitted to explain, in spite of the prosecution's objections, that Jessie made a false statement as a result of the pressure he was under, particularly because he had low self-esteem. The prosecutor brought up the fact that Jessie had not been physically hurt by the police during cross-examination. This gave Stidham the opportunity to highlight how Jessie's confession was impacted by the type of questioning, and how psychological pressure played a significant role in what transpired. In his closing remarks, Fogelman referred to the defense's arguments as distractions and advised the jury to believe the detectives and disregard allegations of coercion. The prosecutor emphasized that Jessie's confession was unambiguous, but Stidham cautioned that it would be a grave error to execute an innocent person. The following day, Jessie lowered his head as he walked into the courtroom. He was devastated when the jury convicted him of first-degree murder. When the judge asked him if he had anything to say, he simply replied, "No." The trial brought up serious issues with the legal system, with many people thinking that an innocent person was punished. He was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The emphasis on coerced confessions sparked calls for improved questioning techniques and fresh data, which prompted a re-examination of Jessie's punishment. In Jonesboro, Arkansas, the trial for Damian Eckles and Jason Baldwin started 2 weeks after Jessie Mskelly Jr. was sentenced. Dan Stidham, the defense lawyer, declared that Jessie would not testify, leaving the prosecution with scant evidence. The prosecutors could claim that Eckles' apparent interest in witchcraft was connected to his involvement in the case because the judge prevented the two defendants from having separate trials. In essence, they could infer Baldwin's guilt from Eckles' background. John Fogelman, the prosecutor, asserted that they would demonstrate the defendant's guilt for killing the 3 boys. Eckles' lawyer contended that there was no proof of guilt, while Baldwin's lawyer highlighted his client's good character. To talk about the boys' final moments, the prosecution called the detectives and the victims' parents. The judge rejected the defense's request for a mistrial after detectives brought up Jessie's confession. Ridge further asserted that Damian implied he was engaged in supernatural activities by mentioning demonic forces. To bolster their argument, they displayed objects from Damian's house, including a dog skull and occult books. In his testimony, medical expert Dr. Frank Peretti mentioned a knife discovered close to Damian's home that matched the victim's wound. However, it was later discovered that the victim's stepfather's knife might also match. The defense sought to expose contradictions in the prosecution's claims and emphasize the paucity of credible evidence connecting Eckles and Baldwin to the crime. They stressed that the evidence was only suggestive and called in experts and witnesses to discuss false confessions. The jury found both defendants guilty of capital murder in spite of efforts to provide an alibi and cast doubt on the validity of the police investigation. Jason Baldwin received a life sentence without the possibility of parole after the jury found him guilty. In contrast, Damian Eckles was given the death penalty, more precisely a lethal injection. This result generated a lot of public interest and raised questions about the fairness of the trial. The West Memphis Three's defense teams diligently sought to appeal their sentences shortly after their trials, pointing out mistakes in the trial and introducing fresh evidence. Vicky Hutchison acknowledged lying under duress from the police, and the jury foreman was charged with misconduct during the trial, which might have affected the outcome. A new hearing resulted from new DNA evidence that connected Chris Byers' stepfather, Terry Hobbs, to the crime scene. There was broad support for the case. Devil's Knot, written by Arkansas reporter Mara Leverett, focused on the failure of justice, while Paradise Lost, a documentary directed by Bruce Sinofsky and Joe Berlinger, was released in 1996. Johnny Depp, Natalie Maines, and Eddie Vedder were among the celebrities who expressed their support. Following several unsuccessful appeals, the Arkansas Supreme Court scheduled a hearing for the new evidence on November 4, 2010. After realizing that this evidence might not establish their innocence, Eckles' new attorneys negotiated with the Attorney General to forego the hearing and proceed with new trials. They suggested an Alford plea, which limited the defendant's ability to seek damages for their erroneous convictions, but permitted them to enter guilty pleas to lesser charges while retaining their innocence. Jason Baldwin reluctantly agreed to the plea in order to spare Eckles from being executed. After serving 18 years in prison, all three men were released on August 19, 2011. However, there was no compensation for their time served and no additional investigation into the initial murders, so their case remained unresolved. After it was initially lost, Eckles' lawyers requested access to the crime scene evidence for DNA testing in July 2021. The majority of the evidence was later found to be undamaged. The Arkansas Supreme Court's decision on April 18, 2024, that people who accept an offered plea still have the right to request a new trial under a particular act, and permitted Eckles to undergo new DNA testing, sparked discussions about justice, the validity of eyewitness testimony, and how societal anxieties can influence court rulings. The case serves as a reminder of the issues with the legal system and the continuous fight for people who were wrongfully convicted and imprisoned. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. When 16-year-old Carol Hutto got a phone call at 7:45 p.m. on December 13, 1976, it made her happy and excited. She hurriedly informed her mother, Norma Hutto, after the call that she would return in roughly 30 minutes after visiting a nearby store that was just a 10-minute walk away. Her mother had no idea that it would be the final time she would see her cherished daughter. After that, Carol never came home. It took 24 agonizing years for the truth to be revealed after interrogation. Who might have made the enigmatic call? What caused Carol to vanish without a trace? We'll examine the 1976 cold case of Carol Hutto, a mystery that remained unsolved for an incredible 24 years. Carol vanished from Largo, Florida, a vibrant city renowned for its sunny weather and welcoming community. With a population of more than 82,000, this city in Pinellas County offers a combination of urban conveniences and stunning natural surroundings. Largo offers a wealth of enjoyable activities and a rich history. Both local residents and visitors find it to be a welcoming environment. However, a crime that occurred here in 1976 altered everything. Let's go back in time to February 6, 1960, when Edward and Norma Hutto welcomed a lovely little girl into the world in the small Florida town of Largo. Carol Dean Hutto was her given name. Everyone in the family lavished her with love and care because she was the youngest. Carol was adored by her classmates at Largo High School, where she grew up, thanks to her kind and compassionate disposition. Carol came from a large family. Although not much is known about her half-brother Jerry Arent Hutto, it is evident that Carol and Jerry had a unique and intimate relationship. Jerry always made an effort to grant his sister's wishes because he loved her very much. Jerry's strong sibling bond was demonstrated by his willingness to do everything Carol asked for. In addition to Jerry, Carol had two sisters, Melinda Darlene and Pamela Beal Hutto, and two brothers, Maurice Barnett and Frank Hutto. Carol was a girl who made her mother and her family happy. Attending exhilarating NASCAR races and amazing wrestling fights were among their favorite hobbies. Her mother remembers her as a devout Christian who was selective about who she hung out with. Unfortunately, Carol never had the opportunity to live out her aspirations, despite having a big heart full of adventure. Carol Hutto, her mother Norma, and her half-brother 17-year-old Jerry Irwin were at her Corvette drive home on December 13, 1976. It all appeared to be a typical evening. They were all having a good time, laughing and telling jokes. Jerry was getting ready for a date, while Norma was busy making dinner for the family. But as the house phone began to ring, their evening took an unexpected turn. When Norma went to answer the phone, she saw that it was Carol's buddy. She gave Carol the phone, and they spoke to each other for a few minutes. However, Norma abruptly canceled the call when she returned. Curiously, Carol's mood abruptly changed after the call. Norma noticed that she was getting really enthusiastic and pleased. Carol rushed to her room, straightened her hair, and looked in the mirror to see how she looked. After 15 minutes or so, she informed her mother that she was going to a neighboring store, which was only 10 minutes' walk from their home. Carol was almost out the door before Norma could ask the store what she wanted, but Carol promised herself she would return shortly before she left. Jerry, Carol's half-brother, likewise said goodbye to Norma and left the house for his date. Carol could generally walk there and return in 20 minutes or less because the store wasn't that far away. Norma therefore anticipated that Carol would return home in 30 minutes, but an hour had gone by and Carol had not returned. Carol was taking longer than expected, and Norma began to worry whether she had run into her friends on the way and was conversing with them. However, when Carol hadn't returned after 2 hours, Norma's anxiety increased. Carol had never missed her curfew before, so her disappearance was worrisome as it was growing dark outside. When Jerry got home at around 10 o'clock at night, Norma, who was rather worried, asked if she had seen Carol. But Jerry had no idea where she was, and neither did Norma. Jerry was even more concerned when he found out that Carol had not come home since she left. He should go out and find her, Norma insisted. He began searching the streets and yelling her name, but got no answers. The store employees said they hadn't seen Carol today, so they raised the alarming subject of where she might be if she didn't go to the store as planned. He even went to the store next to their house, where Carol was meant to go. Unfortunately, Jerry came home and told Norma that he had been unable to locate Carol. They chose to wait until morning in the hopes that Carol would return home by herself, despite their worries. But when the morning sun came out, Norma's anxiety increased because Carol was nowhere to be seen. Norma made the decision to report Carol missing to the police without further delay, but the police told her that they couldn't declare Carol missing because it had been less than 24 hours since she vanished. At this point, they also thought about the likelihood that Carol had fled her house. However, Norma was not prepared to believe that Carol would ever run away from her family or leave her house by herself. She was convinced that her daughter had suffered a terrible fate. Norma and Jerry didn't want to wait for the police to take action because of this. They made the decision to act independently and actively look for Carol on their own. In order to find out if anyone had seen Carol the night before, they went around their area and spoke with neighbors. No one had seen Carol returning home that evening, although most of the neighbors recalled seeing her when she left at around 8 p.m. To see if Carol had spoken to anyone or visited any of her friends' homes, Norma and Jerry also went to each one, but they were unable to locate her. Norma was profoundly impacted by Carol's abrupt departure, and the community as a whole rallied to lend a hand in any way they could after learning that their little Carol was missing. Meanwhile, Carol was being vigorously sought for by the police. To find out if Carol had gone to any of the doors that night, they looked both close to and farther away from her home. Regretfully, nobody was able to verify that they saw her at any of those places. The store Carol was intended to visit had a security camera outside, which the police observed. But after watching the video, they were unable to discover any proof that Carol had been at the store the night she vanished. It was difficult to follow Carol's travels since security cameras were not as widely used as they are now, and only a small number of stores had them installed. However, a fatal discovery was made very quickly. Under strange circumstances, Carol's half-brother Jerry discovered her dead body on the evening of December 14, 1976. Desperate to find Carol, he had been scouting the area alone. He followed his search till he came to a building that was still under construction at the end of the block. This structure was beside a lake at 418 Imperial Drive. The body of Carol was found there, according to Jerry. How exactly he had found her in this particular location was still unknown. Carol's partially undressed body was discovered floating in the ocean. For Jerry, this was a startling and extremely unsettling sight. After reporting the discovery to the Largo police right after, he had the challenging duty of going home and telling Norma the devastating news. It was immediately clear that Carol's death was not an accident when the police arrived to carefully remove her body from the lake in order to preserve any possible evidence. Her injuries and the concrete block that was used to drown her suggested foul play, meaning that she was killed on purpose and that someone tried to conceal her body. Her body was dumped in the lake after the authorities concluded that the attack had most likely taken place in the abandoned construction house. Carol's watch was a key piece of evidence. It was stopped at 10:36 p.m., suggesting that the murder occurred sometime between 10:30 and 10:45 p.m. Some disturbing details emerged when Carol's lifeless body was sent for a comprehensive autopsy. Carol was strangled, which probably caused her to lose consciousness but did not immediately cause her death, according to the coroner's findings. She had also had a serious injury after being struck in the head by a hefty item. In addition to the upsetting discovery, Carol's thigh was severely burned. An even more horrible detail was revealed in the medical examiner's report. Carol was still alive when she was tossed into the water and smothered with a huge slab of concrete. She stayed aware despite the terrifying situation and eventually passed away from drowning. 3 long hairs that belonged to the same individual but appeared to belong to someone else were also found by the coroner during the examination of Carol's body. A 4th hair was discovered on Carol's blue jeans. It was unidentifiable and might have belonged to the murderer. This finding could have been a significant development in the case. However, the hairs were carefully stored away, awaiting the development of more sophisticated techniques that could assist identify the person guilty for Carol's unfortunate death, because there was nothing that could be done with them at the time due to the limitations of medical science in the 1977. Because Jerry Irwin, Carol's half-brother, was also outside on the night Carol was killed, the Largo police briefly focused on him. The police found that Jerry was finished 30 minutes earlier than he said, notwithstanding his claim that he was on a date. They began to question what he was doing during that interval. Why didn't he come home sooner? The restaurant he visited was only approximately 8 minutes away. Since Jerry was unable to offer an alibi for that period of time, the police began to suspect that he was involved in Carol's death. He was the focus of their investigation, but no conclusive proof was found. There was no evidence that Jerry could have harmed Carol. Carol's mother, Norma, was certain that Jerry loved his sister dearly and would never harm her. Even though they were suspicious at first, concentrating on Jerry didn't help them discover the truth. Jerry was eventually exonerated by the police, since they were unable to locate any additional evidence against him. The police worked hard over the next 18 months to follow up on every lead, but they were unable to uncover any information that would help them solve the case. Thus, the inquiry continued in circles. The case became chilly as time passed and the investigation lost steam. The Hutto family was left with burning questions as a result of this. What actually happened to Carol on that pit bull night? Who was to blame for her passing? Along with losing their cherished daughter, they were also frustrated that justice had not been served for her. The murder of Carol remained unsolved for over 2 decades until a chance event in March 1994 gave the investigation a new perspective. Due to a work injury, Officer Brad Hoyes was forced to spend his desk duty looking through cold case files. He discovered the disturbing circumstances of Carol Hutto's murder case while going over the lost files, which rekindled an old inquiry. Officer Brad felt that there were undiscovered aspects of the case that hadn't been fully examined in the first 1976 investigation. His instincts led him to take the risky step of reopening the investigation and retrieving the evidence box that had been stored for years. He found Carol's personal diary among the materials. In the hopes that the diary would have the missing parts required to solve the riddle of Carol's terrible demise, Officer Brad found promise in those pages. And it starts around a month before she passes away. Carol wrote about her covert relationship with her classmate a few pages into the diary. Carol was 16 years old at the time, which was in 1976. The 17-year-old James Brian Kuhn, also known as Jimmy Kuhn, who was born on July 20, 1959, was the object of her intense crush. At Largo High School, where they were both juniors, they would frequently converse with one another. Although there were rumors of their intimacy circulating around the school hallways, they decided to keep their distance and never publicly recognized it. Kuhn requested that Carol keep the connection a secret, because his family was very strict and they wanted to keep it a secret from everyone. Carol also said that she was deeply in love with Kuhn at one point. When she finally reached the line, "I met Jimmy at the lake," it was just too personal, you know. I mean, her body was discovered there, and we think the murder was committed directly next to the house. Kuhn was also one of the people that showed up at Carol's burial looking truly sad and not at all like a suspect in 1976 when the case was first being investigated. As a friend of Carol, Kuhn was also questioned. He stated that he was at home the entire time and that he had not seen or spoken to her on the night of the murder. When cold case investigators re-examined the case in 1994, They discovered a contradiction between Kuen's claims and what the Hutto family had initially informed the police. They disclosed that Carol had gotten a call from none other than Jimmy Kuen on the fatal evening of December 13, 1976. Kuen had a daughter by this point, and he was 34 years of age. After graduating, he went on to serve in the United States Navy, where he was highly successful. His service as a submariner assigned to the U.S. Naval Submarine Base in Connecticut shaped his military career. Detective Sergeant Mike Short, 43, of Largo, was personally involved in the case. He assumed the lead in looking into Carol's murder after learning about the case because he and Kuen had gone to the same Largo high school. He was accompanied by Lieutenant John Carroll, now Deputy Chief of Largo. They took a risk by unexpectedly traveling to Connecticut, where Kuen, an 11-year veteran of the military, was stationed. Kuen's story took a significant turn during this encounter. In a reversal of his previous claims, he acknowledged that he had seen Carol the night before she vanished. He acknowledged that on the night Carol vanished, he had been with her. That admission was important. But the next day, Kuen had a change of heart. He refused to participate in a polygraph test, sought legal counsel, and declined more interviews. The lack of sufficient evidence to conclusively establish that Kuen was the murderer of Carol on the evening of December 13, 1976, presented a problem for the police and prosecution. Since Kuen might be exonerated for anything less than first-degree murder, it seemed improbable that he would be found guilty of first-degree murder, given the statute of limitations. But there was something even more fascinating in the evidence box. Detective Mike opened the box and found a set of strange hairs that had been taken from Carol's body in the crime scene and had been carefully preserved in the late 1980s. The use of DNA testing to determine a person's guilt or innocence in criminal investigations was a turning point in forensic science. As the 1990s went on, the focus moved to looking at mitochondrial DNA, which is found in tiny structures inside human cells and has a higher chance of surviving over time. In light of these developments, Mike was keen to perform a genetic analysis on the hairs in the hopes of identifying the real culprit. But something was wrong. A sample of Kuen's DNA, which was essential for the tests, was not available. The police required a valid search warrant to get Kim's blood in order to gather this crucial piece of evidence. They made the strategic decision to move forward with the goal of spending as much time as possible with the suspect. Detective Mike made the decision to enlist the Naval Criminal Investigation Service, or NCIS, as reinforcements in 1998. They believed that Kuen might become uneasy and make a confession as a result of the naval officer's presence. Detective Mike stood outside the police interrogation room on July 15, 1998, as Navy investigators Dave Early and Tom Asimos sat down with James Kuen, their murder suspect. They first took Kuen's blood sample for additional testing after securing the required warrant. Then, in an effort to reassure and console Kuen, Asimos and Early started talking to him. In order for him to open up and progressively disclose the truth, they wanted to establish trust. The NCIS officers were now certain that Kuen was about to reveal what had transpired on the evening of December 13, 1976. Unexpectedly, they were able to bring Kuen to tears as he brushed away his tears and eventually disclosed the tragic truth about how he killed his girlfriend, Carol Hutto. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, the seasoned cold case investigators weren't persuaded by Kuen's honesty, despite the fact that he seemed distressed. Carol's injuries, especially to her head and neck, were not consistent with a straightforward mishap like tripping and falling. Rather, the nature of these injuries suggested strangling, forced trauma, and bleeding. Though he insisted it was an accident, Kuen had admitted to being the cause of Carol's death. He accepted responsibility for her death, claiming that he did not assist her and that he tried to hide her body and the evidence. Kuen was consequently arrested and held pending trial. But he gave a different account of what happened the night before his trial. In his other account, Kuen first stated that despite his desire for physical contact, however, when Carol objected, the conversation changed course and turned into a physical altercation. Carol began to scream and retaliate by striking and scratching him. Kuen hit her with a 2x4 piece of wood and even tightened his hold around her throat because he was afraid her cries would attract attention. Carol collapsed to the ground, senseless, as he finally released his hold. As a result of his uncertainty and terror, Kuhn decided to conceal her body in an effort to make it seem as though someone else had attacked her. He also burned her thigh in an attempt to cause confusion. Detectives reached the same conclusion in Kuhn's various renditions of events, regardless of the specifics. Carol was beaten, dragged to the water, and flung face down. To keep her body submerged, a concrete block was used as weight. It's interesting to note that Kuhn's second story seemed more credible and fit the evidence better. The circumstances surrounding Carol's unfortunate fate and the physical evidence seemed to support this version of events. On February 9, 2000, the day of the trial, the prosecution sought to convict Kuhn of first-degree murder. Although his attorneys admitted that he was partially responsible for the act, they maintained that manslaughter or perhaps third-degree murder would be a more appropriate punishment. After receiving the case, the jury deliberated for just 22 minutes before rendering a decision. Kuhn was convicted of murder in the first degree. The fact that the offense was committed in 1976 gives Kuhn the opportunity to enjoy freedom again. Judge Philip Federico of the Pinellas Pasco Circuit Court interpreted the state legislation of that year. After 25 years, a person convicted of first-degree murder may be eligible for parole under these provisions. It's interesting to note that Carol's mother, Norma Hutto, felt compelled to speak to Kuhn at the sentencing, even though Kuhn declined to do so. Norma went on to add, "James Kuhn, you took the trust Carol gave you and you used it for your depraved wants." She also mentioned how Carol had trusted him and called him out. She brought up the fact that Kuhn had attended Carol's funeral, disguising his true motivations by acting like her friend and feigning distress. Norma expressed her wish that he would never be released from prison and that he was unworthy of a fresh start, pointing out that he had denied her daughter the opportunity. A hopeful mother, Norma had a bright future in mind for her newborn daughter, Carol. She looked forward to the day Carol would graduate from Largo High School with pride. She envisioned her 16-year-old daughter in a gorgeous white gown, walking down the aisle to begin a happy life with her husband and perhaps even starting a family. But all of those hopes were dashed in a single night, and it was fervently hoped that Kuhn would never be allowed to leave prison. Let's now discuss Kuhn's case. Do you believe that he truly felt regret for his actions, and do you think that he deserved a life sentence? And do you think Kuhn's behavior with Carol was premeditated or just an accident? If you have any specific sections or sentences you'd like to clarify further, please let me know. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Victor Silier, a seasoned skydiver, made another jump on a typical sunny day in Wiltshire County. The sensation of wind on her face, the rush of adrenaline, and the view of the infinite sky were all familiar to her. However, she became aware that something had gone horribly wrong shortly after she had deployed her parachute. The reserve parachute did not deploy correctly, and the lines were tangled. Victoria fell with a terrifying velocity. Her only concern during that heart-stopping moment was her kids and how they would be left without her. However, how could a seasoned teacher like this make such a mistake, and why? These questions led to the discovery of a terrifying mystery that would permanently alter Victoria's life. Victoria Silier, who is she? Victoria Silier was born in 1977 to a retired military officer in Edinburgh, Scotland's capital. She was lively, vivacious, and full of life from a young age. She devotedly pursued a number of sports during her school years, and when she made her first skydive at the age of 16, she instantly fell in love with the sky. Victoria entered the University of Glasgow's medical program after graduating from high school. She obtained her degree in physical therapy while still participating in sports. She joined the British Army as a physical therapist because she wanted to be like her father. Victoria developed into a highly accomplished skydiver in addition to her medical career. She completed more than 1,500 jumps and obtained her instructor's certification. As a mentor with the Army National Parachuting Association and a free fall coach, she was a true professional. Through perseverance and hard work, Victoria rose to the position of captain by the time she turned 30, marking a significant career accomplishment. She made a good living while juggling her duties as a skydiving instructor and a physical therapist at a military hospital. Her private life, however, was less fortunate. She wed a medical colleague in 2008, but the union disintegrated after just 1 year. A tall, gregarious officer named Emil Silier entered the hospital where Victoria worked in the middle of 2009. He ended up attending one of Victoria's therapy sessions while he was recuperating from a skiing accident. He quickly became the love of her life and her second husband, a love that nearly cost her everything. Emil Silier, an unfaithful partner and perilous charmer. Let's now examine the primary antagonist of the narrative. Born in South Africa in 1980, Emil Silier came from a wealthy British expat family that ran a construction business. His parents catered to all of his needs and desires, allowing him to grow up pampered and conceited. Emil began dating Nicoline Shepherd, a young girl, when he was 17. He was already employed at his father's business and had completed high school by then. Emil knew how to make a good impression, dressed well, and always had money to spend. Shortly before her 16th birthday, Nicoline became pregnant and gave birth to their first child, a daughter. A second child was born to the couple approximately a year and a half later. However, they never made it to the altar, even though they had 2 children together. Emil asserted that he was not prepared for the obligations of family life. He kept having affairs with other women in spite of his role as a father. Although he didn't try hard to conceal his actions, he was always able to win Nicoline back and persuade her to stay with him. Emil made the decision to relocate to the UK in the early 2000s with the intention of establishing a prosperous career, purchasing a house, and eventually bringing Nicoline and the children to live with him. On a work visa, he went to the UK, but his trip didn't go as expected. Emil took on menial side jobs to make ends meet because he was having trouble finding steady employment. He often lived with different women and made fewer calls home to save money. Emil consistently refused Nicoline's requests to bring them to the UK or return to South Africa. Citing financial difficulties, he said he was unable to provide for them. However, he frequently bought pricey things for himself and lavished gifts on his many romantic partners. Nicoline and the kids were temporarily financially supported by Emil's parents. Nicoline's prospective mother-in-law then disclosed a startling secret during one of their conversations. Emil had just gotten married. Carly Taylor, a British woman, became his new wife. Nicoline called Emil that same day and demanded an explanation. He reassured her calmly that the marriage was solely for legal purposes, to obtain permanent residency in the United Kingdom. Nicoline tried to remain composed and trusted his story, but she soon discovered he had no intention of inviting them over. She packed one suitcase, gathered her children, and took a plane to the UK, determined to force Emil to take responsibility. She desired Emil to be involved in raising their kids. By this point, Carly was expecting their second child, and Emil and Carly already had a son together. Carly was unaware of the existence of Nicoline and her 2 children. The unexpected appearance of Nicoline surprised Emil and his expectant wife. In an attempt to make his shocked wife understand him, Emil had to switch to South African Afrikaans. He told Nicoline quite bluntly that he had no intention of continuing to be involved in their children's lives, and that their relationship was over. The always endearing Emil was forced to tell his wife who she was, but the heartbroken Nicoline fled in tears. However, Nicoline was portrayed as a villain rather than a victim in the highly embellished story he told Carly. For about 6.5 years, Emil and Carly were married, but their marriage was not happy. It was the same pattern as in his last relationship. Emil regularly cheated on Carly with several women he met wherever he went, even though they had 2 kids together. Interestingly, Nicoline, Carly, and later Victoria would all talk about Emil's incessant demands for intimacy, even weeks after giving birth. With little consideration for the discomfort or health hazards his partners might face, Emil signed a contract to join the Army Physical Training Corps shortly after he married Carly, joining the British Armed Forces. He basically turned into a fitness instructor who earned a respectable salary and a military rank. Emil and Victoria's love story. Emil broke his ankle in a skiing accident in 2009 and ended up in the hospital. Victoria, a physical therapist, was there when he first met her. Immediately sparks flew between them. It made no difference that Victoria was 3 years older. Emil tried his best to comfort her in any way he could, because she was still emotionally healing from a recent divorce. Victoria was initially unaware that her new romantic interest was still married. Similarly, Carly was unaware that her husband was meeting with a divorce lawyer and getting ready to file for divorce. When the truth was revealed, Emil attempted to blame Carly for his marriage's failure, but she responded by telling Victoria that Nikolai and Emil had 2 other children. This realization astounded Victoria. Her ostensibly ideal partner had a convoluted past, including 4 children and 2 prior relationships. Emil, however, insisted that he had never felt this way about anyone else and declared his unwavering love for her. Victoria had already fallen deeply in love with him. Even though those words might have meant nothing to someone else, she discovered that she could accept him for who he was, flaws and all, and forgive the lies. With time, Carly and Victoria were able to establish a true friendship in addition to becoming cordial. The 2 women had become so close that Carly even trusted Victoria to take care of her kids. Emil quickly proposed to Victoria after completing his divorce in 2010. The couple threw a lavish wedding after she gladly accepted. After her parents died, Victoria used the money she inherited from them to buy a large house in Wiltshire, where they now reside. The couple's first child, a daughter named April, was born in 2011. In 2015, their son Ben was born, expanding their family. Spending a lot of time with their children, the new parents seemed committed. Their family appeared to be content and strong from the outside. Victoria was an enthusiastic skydiver who had even introduced the sport to her husband, Emil. He became an expert in packing both main and reserve parachutes and obtained his own certification as a skydiving instructor, giving the family an additional source of income. With 2 gorgeous kids, a devoted husband who had just been promoted to sergeant, and a life that appeared ideal to their friends and family, Victoria's marriage seemed like a dream come true. However, Emil soon got tired of this seemingly perfect life. He started looking for affairs, and even though he didn't do much to conceal his actions, he would constantly beg Victoria's pardon on his knees. He would vouch for the fact that these liaisons were pointless and that she was the only person he loved. In order to keep up appearances, and the appearance of a perfect family in front of friends, family, and co-workers, Victoria repeatedly forgave him. As previously stated, Victoria had been an instructor at the Army Parachute Association and had a deep love for skydiving since she was a young girl. By early 2015, she had performed more than 2,500 jumps without any mistakes or mishaps. Naturally, Victoria had to take a break from the sport she loved so much during her pregnancy, and she missed it terribly. Her second child was born in early March 2015. Emil then shocked her on April 1st by telling her that he had reserved a tandem skydive for the 2 of them. Victoria was ecstatic, perceiving this as a considerate act from her spouse, who appeared to wish to inject some excitement into their everyday routine. The couple arrived at the skydiving base with their older daughter on April 4, the day of the scheduled jump. They prepared, but the weather abruptly changed against them. Heavy clouds rolled in and the wind increased, making it impossible for the plane to take off. The jump was rescheduled for Easter Sunday the following day. Upon arriving home, Emil abruptly informed Victoria that he would not be able to accompany her the following day. In addition to insisting that it would be best to leave the kids at home because they would only grow tired and no one else would be available to watch them, he said that urgent matters had arisen. Emil wished Victoria luck as he bid her farewell on the morning of April 5 and remained behind with their 5-week-old son and 4-year-old daughter. With a positive attitude, Victoria set out, looking forward to her long-awaited jump. However, the weather wasn't great again. After waiting for several hours, the group was finally given the all-clear to take off. The plane carrying 12 skydivers took off at around 3 p.m. One by one, the skydivers started their jumps at the proper altitude. Last to jump, Victoria Silier relished every moment of her ascent through the sky, but as soon as she pulled the cord to release her parachute, she knew something was seriously amiss. No matter how hard she tried, she was unable to untangle the tangled lines of her main parachute. Quickly, she sliced it off and proceeded to use her backup chute. The unimaginable occurred at that point. Approximately 1/3 of the reserve parachute opened. It looked like this might be the end, as Victoria started to spin wildly through the air at a terrifying speed. Victoria later acknowledged that, although she was afraid, She didn't consider dying. Her husband and their 2 young children were waiting for her at home, and she was thinking about them. She tried to position her body to minimize the injuries from the inevitable impact and did everything she could to slow her fall. In her ears, the wind roared. She lost all sense of time and space as everything whirled around her. The world grew dark. Victoria was lying in a recently plowed field when she came to. She couldn't understand what had happened or why there was so much noise all around her. She was confused. Her co-workers were shocked to discover her alive after racing to the scene. They were taken aback, however, when Victoria opened her eyes and requested assistance in standing up. As it happened, she had been extremely lucky. Her fall had been cushioned by the soft, loose soil, avoiding potentially fatal injuries. Victoria had suffered a broken leg, collarbone, and multiple ribs, but she miraculously survived. However, her head, internal organs, and spine were largely intact on the side she landed on. After being airlifted to the closest hospital by emergency personnel, it is almost unheard of for both parachutes to fail, and it is rarely necessary to deploy a reserve parachute. Red flags were raised right away. After learning of the incident, the skydiving base's lead instructor made the decision to examine Victoria's parachutes in person. Although the main chute's lines were tangled, it was unclear if this was the result of a packer's error or if someone had purposefully sabotaged it. Things became even more suspicious when the reserve parachute was examined. There were 2 essential pieces of equipment missing. It appeared as though these parts had never been there and had never been torn away because there was no indication of damage. Victoria came perilously close to death as a result of the reserve chute's improper deployment. A mistake of this size was practically impossible because the parachute had been inspected at least 10 times by numerous experienced professionals. The lead instructor was extremely concerned about both parachute failures. He made the decision to report a possible murder attempt to the police on his own. It just so happened that, at about the same time, Victoria's best friend Caroline called the police with a similar worry. But Caroline didn't think twice about naming the suspect she had in mind. When Caroline learned of the suspicious accident, she became concerned. She told investigators that Emil, Victoria's husband, might be connected. Caroline claims that although the marriage appeared to be happy on the surface, Emil was actually a toxic and manipulative partner. Victoria disregarded numerous warning signs because she was so consumed by her love for him. An expanding study. The parachutes turned out to be important pieces of evidence during the police's thorough investigation into the incident. Victoria, meanwhile, recovered remarkably quickly and was in the hospital for less than a month. She credited her husband's constant care and support for her quick recovery. Emil seemed to be the ideal husband, showing her affection, taking care of the house, and assisting with their kids. Victoria was therefore taken aback when policemen arrived at their door to talk to Mr. Siliers. Emil didn't fight back. He went to the station voluntarily to respond to their inquiries. Emil, a negligent father and an unfaithful husband, maintained his composure while being questioned, but he was aware that investigators would soon find text messages he had exchanged with his many lovers. He made the decision to discuss his affairs with others in the hopes of avoiding the disclosures. He acknowledged that he had been dissatisfied in his marriage and blamed Victoria for not providing for him. He claimed that although he had been preparing to divorce her for some time, he had put it off due to the children. Emil admitted that he had been seeing an Austrian ski instructor named Stephanie Galler for about 6 months, and even had plans to wed her shortly. Emil disclosed his financial difficulties as well. He owed a lot of money to a number of individuals and businesses that provided high-interest loans. He was a self-confessed gambling addict who regularly wagered and lost, which led to his debts skyrocketing. He said that some of his creditors had started threatening him, and he even implied that Victoria's death attempt might have been a warning to him. As it happened, Emil Siliers did have a mountain of debt, but his account of the parachute incident sounded so implausible. The fact that Emil casually stated that he had personally examined his wife's parachutes and never left them in his sight, even bringing them with him when he used the restroom, only served to heighten investigators' suspicions. The police detained him for additional interrogation after this detail raised serious concerns. Officers conversed with Victoria at home during this time, telling her about the strange details and the suspicions expressed by the lead instructor and her friend Caroline. Victoria was shaken and in disbelief. She acknowledged her husband's extramarital affairs and financial difficulties, admitting that their marriage was far from ideal. She also disclosed that Emil had not been very enthusiastic about the birth of their youngest son and had hardly spent any time with her children. Victoria found it difficult to accept that her husband would ever wish to hurt her, in spite of everything. Emil didn't initially seem to have a strong reason to divorce his wife. First of all, despite his mounting debts, Victoria had always supported him financially and forgiven him for his infidelity, giving him unfettered access to her bank account. Emil led a comfortable life and indulged in his vices. Second, Victoria had safeguarded her resources. In her will, she left her savings account and the house she purchased prior to their marriage to her sister. Her sister would take on the role of guardian for the children in the event of her death, guaranteeing Emil would not be able to access the inheritance. Victoria feared her husband would waste everything because she knew he was not responsible for his finances. Emil was also aware of this and realized that her estate would not be advantageous to him. Investigators believed that he might have been motivated by the possibility that he would receive a life insurance payout of almost £200,000 sterling if Victoria died. Emil was also planning to move abroad with his new girlfriend as part of their future plans. Victoria recalled an important detail when questioned about the parachute. Taking Victoria's backpack with him, Emil had taken their daughter to the bathroom when she needed to use it on the day of the jump. According to the rules, all equipment had to be returned because the jump was cancelled that day due to bad weather. However, Emil persuaded Victoria to leave the equipment in a locker, claiming that doing so would avoid the lines at the equipment window the following morning and save time. Victoria insisted, however, that her husband was not allowed to tamper with the parachutes. She noted that he had only been gone for roughly 5 minutes, which was, in her opinion, not nearly enough time to make any changes to the equipment. Caroline talked about a terrifying experience that happened a week prior to the unsuccessful parachute jump during her interview. Victoria had almost died from a gas leak at home. Victoria and their 2 kids were left alone when Emil said he had to spend the night at the barracks the previous evening. Victoria smelled gas the following morning. When she called Emil to tell him, he told her that she was just dreaming and told her to start cooking without worrying. Fortunately, Victoria was not easily persuaded. When the technician from the gas company arrived after she called, they found a significant leak at the gas valve located inside a cabinet close to the stove. The valve nut's noticeable scratches indicated that someone had used a wrench to tamper with it. Emil was notoriously clumsy with tools, so it appeared that he was the one who made the marks. Additionally, there were blood traces on the valve from a cut he probably sustained while working on it quickly, and he hadn't bothered to clean up the evidence. According to investigators, he had loosened the nut just enough to start a slow leak, not enough to be noticeable unless there was an explosion. Later, Emil asserted that the valve had most likely come loose due to vibrations from a nearby building's construction. The incident was written off as a strange accident at the time, and no one suspected Emil of foul play. However, if an explosion had occurred, Victoria and their 2 small children might have perished, instantly resolving Emil's issues. Determined to depart for Austria with his new partner Stephanie, he swiftly came up with the plan with the parachutes after that plan failed. The suspected attacker is defended by the victim. Victoria persisted in defending her husband, claiming he could never want her dead, in spite of all the dubious evidence and witness statements. At that point, investigators decided it was time to expose her to the harsh reality of the man she had lived with. They told Stephanie about Emil's messages, in which he essentially asked her to marry him. He had written about his desire to start a new life and his profound regrets about marrying Victoria. That wasn't all, though. Emil had profiles on several dating apps, was seeing a number of other women, and even went to speed dating events to meet new people for casual dates. But finding out that her husband had been having an affair with his ex-wife Carly was the greatest betrayal for Victoria. Unaware of Emil's dishonesty, Carly and Victoria were good friends who frequently worked out weekend custody arrangements for the children. Although Victoria acknowledged that the gas leak incident had raised suspicions from the beginning, she chose to ignore them because she believed her husband would never endanger their children. In addition, he had been gone nearly 3 times as long as Emil, who had only been in the bathroom for 5 minutes with her parachute. He said their daughter had spent a lot of time in the restroom when he got back. Victoria was also aware that her husband was using her credit cards to make extravagant purchases for his mistresses. Emil, however, had consistently maintained that fraudsters had somehow obtained his account details and pledged to notify the authorities of the theft, even though he never did. The case was taken to court because of Victoria's and other witnesses' strong testimony. An expert would only need roughly 10 minutes to sabotage both parachutes and repack them carefully enough to evade detection, according to a reenactment done during the investigation. The fact that Emil had allegedly attempted to harm his wife twice, putting not only her but also their children in danger, persisted even though the majority of the evidence appeared circumstantial. When the trial started in November 2017, Emil vehemently denied all of the charges. He asserted that he would never endanger his own children and that he would never harm the mother of his children. In addition, he claimed that Victoria had been on the edge of a breakdown after multiple heated arguments with him and that she may have tampered with her own parachute because she was suffering from severe postpartum depression. Victoria was experiencing an odd situation. Emil almost seemed to hypnotize her. She reiterated his allegations in court, saying he couldn't have hurt her or their kids. She even acknowledged that she had experienced depression following the birth of their son. Attendees at the trial were unable to ignore how strongly Emil continued to influence her. Emil was found guilty of all charges on June 15, 2018, and given a life sentence with the possibility of release after at least 18 years. Victoria finally admitted to herself that she had been living with a real monster for all those years, and she filed for divorce shortly after the trial. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. On Madison Street in New York, Officer Freeman saw a man throwing big black garbage bags into the river's edge early on April 7, 1996. The man froze as Freeman came closer. The officer noticed the two cars next to the man, their trunks stuffed with trash bags. He searched and found something startling. Bloody tools and blood-soaked clothing were found in the bags, along with a dismembered body that had been cut into 66 pieces in the most gory way imaginable. The man who disposed of the bags introduced himself as Vladimir Zelinin, 48. The police quickly learned that the person inside the bags was Yakov Gluzman, a 48-year-old billionaire and well-known cancer researcher who had tragically been duped by Vladimir. When Vladimir brought up Yakov's wife, Rita Gluzman, the case took an unexpected turn. The crucial query was, what role did Rita play in this terrible incident? Was she planning to murder her husband, or was Vladimir just assigning blame to deflect criticism and avoid responsibility? We must go back in time and meet Yakov Gluzman, the man at the heart of this whole situation, in order to fully comprehend it. What part did he play in this terrible incident, and who was he? January 2, 1948 was Yakov Gluzman's birthday. He was an internationally renowned scientist who made significant contributions to the study of cancer. Since their early years in Ukraine, which was then a part of the Soviet Union, Yakov and his wife Rita had known one another. 1948 saw the birth of Rita Gluzman in Ternopil, Ukraine. She was the oldest child of Holocaust survivors, Paula and Lab Shapiro. As a child, Rita saw friends and family members killed by the Nazis, which gave her a distinct viewpoint. Nevertheless, Yakov was unable to obtain a visa to depart the Soviet Union due to his importance as a researcher. He was regarded as an emerging, talented scientist. In February 1970, Rita found out she was expecting their son after departing for Israel. To facilitate their emigration, Yakov took a menial job as a carpenter, sacrificing his academic career in the Soviet Union. Rita persuaded the UN to bring her and Yakov back together in America with the aid of Jewish organizations. She even put pressure on the United States by going on an 18-day hunger strike close to the UN Senate to assist in her reunion with Yakov. Rita's will to go on a hunger strike was obvious. She was a very motivated individual. She desired to succeed in her life. Yakov was allowed to join her in the West by the Soviet Union as a result of her efforts. Yakov was able to carry on with his scientific work after the couple eventually got back together in the United States in 1972. They made Long Island, New York their permanent home in 1977, 5 years later. Yakov founded the pharmaceutical business Harbor Laboratory in New York by 1987. With Yakov's assistance, Rita also founded her technology business, ECI Technologies, at the same time. In 1987, Yakov advanced to the position of Director of Molecular Biology at Rockland County's Letterly Laboratories. Yakov worked in Rockland, so Rita had to make the difficult choice to move to Long Island while managing ECI Technologies. As the family's fortunes improved, they eventually moved into a large home in the posh neighborhood of Upper Saddle River, New Jersey, which is a very pleasant upper-middle-class neighborhood. The homes in this lovely neighborhood are very comfortable and sit on 3/4 to an acre of land. Vladimir's claims don't add up. If Rita and Yakov had a happy marriage, is he making this whole thing up to cover up a darker agenda, such as eradicating Yakov for financial gain? Let's go back in time to the discovery of Yakov's body before drawing any conclusions. Officer Freeman made a strange discovery in a parking lot near the river's edge on Easter, April 7, 1996. 2 cars with open trunks were the first thing he noticed. He also saw Vladimir Zelinin, who had one glove on his right hand and was dressed in a t-shirt. Large black trash bags were being thrown into the river by Zelinin. Freeman cautiously approached and saw that Zelinin's shoes and pants were splattered with blood, and that a surgical glove was also covered in blood. The air was heavy with the stench of drying blood. As Freeman continued his investigation, he discovered 2 bags, one containing blood-soaked clothing and the other containing bloody tools, including a hacksaw, axes, knives, and a scalpel. Unbelievably, 8 additional bags containing Yakov Gluzman's tragically dismembered remains were found in the trunks of the 2 cars. His nose and lips were even removed, as part of the horrific act of chopping his body into 66 pieces. Vladimir Zelinin, wearing blood-stained trousers, stood beside Officer Freeman. Zelinin, who was Russian, could hardly speak English. He shockingly disclosed that Vladimir's cousin, Rita Gluzman, had been instrumental in his immigration to the United States just 11 months earlier. As Vladimir admitted that Rita was the one who coerced him into carrying out the unimaginable deed of killing Yakov, the terrifying realization came to light. Rita had already left with her passport when Bergen County authorities showed up at her house the next day. Prosecutors were concerned that she may have escaped abroad, but Rita was allegedly on her way to Long Island while Zelinin was being held in Bergen County. It was clear that she knew the police would be looking for her. She made a quick stop in Nyack along the way, stealing a set of New York license plates from a parked car to hide her car's New Jersey tags. There was little question that Rita had planned the murder and was now evading the authorities, despite the fact that investigators in both jurisdictions had not formally named her as a suspect in her husband's death. They made it clear in a public alert that they wanted to talk to her. After her husband passed away, Rita disappeared for 6 days. On April 12, 1996, the police finally located her in Cold Spring Harbor, Long Island. Rita was caught breaking into a guest cabin by a cleaning lady during a routine cleaning round at the Hawk's Nest cabin. Her husband had worked for a company that owned this cabin. The woman had quickly called the police because she thought Rita was a thief. Rita attempted to flee by scurrying out a rear window onto the lab grounds after being confronted. She was eventually located and taken into custody by the local police. Notably, authorities discovered a variety of travel brochures, including some from Switzerland and Australia, inside her car, which also had a stolen license plate. When Rita Gluzman was arrested, the police were taken aback to see her. She was no longer the woman who wore expensive clothing. Her clothes, makeup, hair color, and even airline information had all changed. The police became increasingly suspicious because she had completely changed her appearance. However, there was one issue that prevented the police from charging her with her husband's murder under New York law. When flaws started to show in their marriage's apparently flawless exterior, the investigation took a different turn. The couple's hidden tensions surfaced during their move from Long Island to New Jersey. It turned out that moving to New Jersey, even though it was a mutual decision, put Rita under financial strain, particularly for her business, ECI Technologies. Yakov's income was crucial to the company's survival because it was not doing as well as it once did. However, there was one contradiction. Despite Rita's claims that the move left them impoverished, she was spotted driving a BMW, wearing mink coats and leading a fairly opulent lifestyle. On the other hand, Yakov used to wear regular jeans and drive a 1983 Nissan. According to his friends, he was more of an ordinary guy who wore khakis everywhere he went. The American dream appealed to Rita. She desired high living and spas. Yakov Gluzman left the home in New Jersey in the summer of 1995 and rented a second-floor apartment in Pearl River, just a few blocks from his place of employment. Yakov had begun dating a woman he had met in 1994 while traveling to Israel to visit his family. By September of that year, the rift between Rita and Yakov had become irreversible. While Rita's technology company was in danger of going bankrupt, Yakov was making progress in his career as a cancer researcher. In a phone call with his father in the fall of 1994, Yakov acknowledged that his marriage to Rita, which had lasted 25 years, was failing. Yakov Gluzman filed for divorce. The ECI Technologies company became a focal point during their divorce proceedings. Yakov insisted on thoroughly examining the company's finances before accepting any terms, while Rita desired sole ownership. Rita was devastated to hear this. Yakov claimed marital cruelty as the cause of the divorce when he filed for it. Tragic events occurred 4 months later, in 1996, when the couple's already shaky relationship was further strained when their 25-year-old son died while serving in the Israeli army. Yakov wanted to leave Rita because she was so furious. How could he have the audacity to abandon her, who was so invested in his transformation in the United States? Rita noticed that she was becoming desperate, and some people noticed that her behavior was becoming unpredictable. She found it difficult to control her cravings for luxury, even after Yakov gave her $90,000 when he moved out a year earlier in 1995. She was suddenly in America, where she could eat as much as she pleased. For her, it represented success. Rita Gluzman engaged a private investigator to look for any negative information about Yakov in an effort to stop the divorce. She went to unlawful measures such as wiretapping Yakov's phone and even threatening to spread the AIDS virus to his girlfriend. She wanted to discredit this woman in Israel by putting cocaine on her, among other things. She had attempted to hire a lot of people. Her husband was being followed by others. She had extortion attempts against her husband's family. Rita Gluzman started planning his murder after these plans failed to stop the divorce. She experienced yet another setback when she was arrested on shoplifting charges after being caught stealing small items from a New Jersey pharmacy. Her business kept failing, and as accusations were made by both parties, the divorce process grew more acrimonious. Rita was prepared to involve her cousin Zelinin and had already made a firm decision. Despite being straightforward, her plan was extremely cruel. Rita got a key to her ex-husband's apartment in the months before Easter. During one of their arguments, she persuaded him to give it to her and had a copy made. She was aware of her ex-husband's routine, which included him spending Saturday nights at the lab and typically coming home at 11:30 p.m. Knowing this, Rita made sure they had everything they would require, including a knife, a scalpel, a hacksaw, and a variety of cleaning supplies. Rita and Zelinin drove from Bergen County in a late-model Ford Taurus registered to her company on the evening of April 6, 1996, just hours before Yakov was scheduled to return home. They parked near Yakov's apartment in a poorly lit spot and waited in silence in the living room. It was 11:30 p.m. when Yakov parked his Nissan Maxima and went inside his apartment. At that moment, Zelinin struck first with an axe. When Yakov entered his apartment with an axe and a hatchet, she and Vladimir were waiting for him and jumped on him, attacking him. Rita Gluzman then approached and started striking her husband with the axe, according to Zelinin. It was then that Zelinin's hand was injured. He was unable to see exactly where he struck Yakov because of the darkness, but the scientist fell to the ground. Rita then attacked her husband with ferocity and violent force. Her axe once slipped and struck Zelinin's right hand, causing it to bleed continuously. Rita insisted that they would examine Zelinin's wound later because they were pressed for time. She took a knife out of the bag and stabbed her ex-husband in the chest to make sure he was dead. His bloody body was dragged into the bathroom, where it was dismembered. Rita was adamant that no part of the man was big enough to be recognized. To make it impossible for anyone who might find the body to identify him, they even cut off his nose and lips, in addition to cutting off his fingertips to prevent fingerprint identification. Rita went into a cleaning frenzy, trying to get rid of any sign of the crime while Zelenin kept butchering the body. Around 3 in the morning, Kathy Armstrong, a neighbor who lived 1 floor below Yakov, was the only one who heard a thumping and banging sound. April 7, 1996. She was unaware that the remains of Yakov were being disposed of, his bloody clothes and body parts packed into 9 plastic garbage bags. Another bag was filled with the equipment needed for the gory task. After that, the bags were placed in the 2 cars' trunks. After returning to East Rutherford, Zelenin would dispose of Gluzman's remains in the Passaic River and then, before dawn, dispose of the car. But there was a hitch. They were not on time. Zelenin unintentionally set off the car's theft alarm while loading it. If anyone in the apartment complex heard the alarm, they didn't bother to look into it because it was only a short cry in the night. Rita, however, became frightened, leapt into the Taurus and told Zelenin to run. After circling the neighborhood for a while, they cautiously made their way back to the apartment complex, checked to make sure everything was okay, and went back to their solemn task. And it took longer than Rita had expected to dismember Yakov and clean his apartment. The necessity to treat Zelenin's hand wound, which resulted from Rita's violent behavior against her husband, further threw off this schedule. Zelenin and Rita stopped at a CVS pharmacy in the town of Fairlawn on their way south. It was captured on a security camera that Rita spent $32 on bandages. What at first glance seemed to be a simple murder case turned out to be anything but. After investigators inspected the crime scene at Yakov's Pearl River apartment, the strange traces of forensic evidence that the investigators found had not yet been tested. Even after testing, there was still uncertainty, because there was no assurance that Rita would be directly implicated in the crime. The police knew that even if they were able to locate Rita's stray fingerprint, a competent defense lawyer could have it rejected by linking it to one of the couple's sporadic arguments. At this point, Zelenin's confession was the only solid evidence the police had. This presented a problem, though, because according to New York state law, an accomplice's testimony could not be used as the basis for a murder case unless it was backed up by other witnesses or strong evidence, neither of which was present at the time. Michael Rosen, Rita's lawyer, attempted to obtain bail the day after her arrest, pointing to the peculiar circumstances of the case. Rosen filed a felony examination after the judge denied bail despite the possibility of murder charges. For Rita to be detained without bail, prosecutors had 48 hours to demonstrate that she was dangerous and that there was a chance she would run away again. Since the police couldn't produce enough proof, Rosen was successful and Rita was taken to jail after posting a $250,000 bond. However, everything changed when an FBI agent called. Unexpectedly, Rosen was ordered to bring Rita to the United States, White Plains Federal Court Building. Rosen found this surprising and didn't understand why the federal government was becoming involved. The reason became evident as Rosen and Rita arrived. Local authorities had worked with federal prosecutors to devise a novel strategy to charge Rita for her role in her husband's death, while Michael Rosen had been preoccupied with getting her bail. Federal prosecutors invoked the Violence Against Women Act, a 1994 domestic violence statute, in a brief 4-page complaint. It was a daring step. This law permitted federal intervention in cases of domestic violence committed by someone who crosses state lines, a tactic that had never before been employed against a woman. But it gave the police the power they needed to bring Rita to justice. It was noteworthy because it gave them permission to use Zelenin's testimony. In court, Zelenin described the events leading up to the incident and how they dismembered Yakov. Vladimir Zelenin claimed that Rita Gluzman was behind a wall a few feet away and that he was concealed behind the door as it opened. Zelenin struck Yakov's head with an axe for the first time as soon as he entered the room. With a knife in hand, Rita hacked and stabbed Mr. Gluzman until she nearly cut Zelenin's fingers off his right hand. According to Zelenin, he began by chopping off the arm at the shoulder, followed by the left leg below the knee and the right leg below the knee. Then, he claimed, he severed his head. Witness reports from Yakov's neighbors who saw a couple packing bags into a car at 3 in the morning were among the other pieces of evidence the police brought in. April 7, 1996, Rita was recognized by a pharmacy employee as the agitated woman buying bandages and antiseptic at 4 in the morning. The same morning. In addition, Rita's controlling personality was acknowledged by a private investigator she hired to spy on her husband and his lover. More than a year and a half after Yakov's passing, on April 3, 1997, Rita faced the U.S. Judge Barrington Parker, District Court. Despite her denials, the jury found her guilty of killing Yakov, dismembering him and dumping him in the river after being persuaded by Zelinan's testimony. She was given a life sentence in prison by the judge. In the Soviet Union, the woman who had once been celebrated as a symbol of freedom for a whole class was now imprisoned. Vladimir Zelinin was later given a 22-and-a-half-year prison sentence in May 1997. Rita Gluzman was released from prison on compassionate grounds in 2020 because of her deteriorating health, which included early Parkinson's disease and multiple strokes. Although Yakov's brother wrote a letter opposing Rita's release, expressing horror and fear, the judge took into consideration Rita's request for a second chance to avoid dying in prison. Rita went back home after the judge allowed her release despite reservations. Due to a broken marriage, Yakov Gluzman's life took a terrible turn. The unfortunate thing is that rather than finding a peaceful solution, his wife, once regarded as a symbol of freedom, caused their relationship to devolve into a nightmare. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. Sometimes it is hard to embrace the truth, so people make up a lie that they genuinely start to believe and persuade others of. Truth is something that exists in reality and corresponds to the actual state of circumstances. To celebrate the new year, 11 young men and 1 girl gathered in a hotel room. You'll think, strange collaboration, and you'll be correct. But hold on, one information will totally alter your perspective. Since all of the men at this party belong to a sexual minority, the 12 friends who got together to celebrate the year 2021 did so with great joy. In fact, they celebrated so well that on January 1st, the company had to take the only girl to the hospital, where doctors declared her dead. However, who was she? How did she pass away, and did anyone face charges related to her demise? However, everything is in order. You'll realize why we began this story with the idea of truth, as we dive into the previous party, practically minute by minute, and learn what transpired on that fatal night. Thus, John Paul de la Serna arrived at the 4-star City Garden Grand Hotel in Manila, the Philippine capital, around 11 a.m. on December 31, 2020. 9 additional men booked into rooms 2207 and 2209, which were on the same level, during the day, and Christine Desera checked in later. Shortly after midnight, John Paul Kalili, the hotel manager, joined the merry company. The focus of New Year's Eve night was dancing, having a good time, and drinking a lot of alcohol. When Rommel Galida awoke at approximately 10 in the morning, she saw Christine dozing off in the bathtub. He wrapped a blanket around her and returned to his slumber. She was unconscious and starting to turn blue when he woke up a few hours later. 3 friends and hotel employees drove Christine to the hospital, but when they arrived at the emergency department, the physicians just declared her dead. The only girl was dead in the morning after spending the whole night in the hotel room with the 11 guys. News. The public was outraged by the crime's headlines. Since it was clear what a bunch of young men and 1 female could do all night, everyone had the same idea of what the story would be about. The investigation's task was to determine what actually transpired on that New Year's Eve night and the cause of Christine Desera's death. Born on April 13, 1997, Christine Angelica Desera was raised in Barangay San Isidro, General Santos City, into the prosperous household of John Nestor de la Serna and Sharon Rose Faba de la Serna. She developed into a bright, independent, and gregarious young woman. For her 3 siblings, Monica, Chloe, and JJ, Kristen was a devoted sister. She relocated to the bigger and more promising city of Davao, which is located on the shores of the bay of the same name. After completing high school, she enrolled in a university there. Christine was active on social media, danced, modeled, and studied hard. In addition, Christine was the pinnacle of knowledge and beauty. She received a Bachelor of Arts in Communication, Arts with a major in Media Arts from the University of the Philippines, Mindanao, in Davao City in 2017 with honors. The girl has taken an active part in both acting and modeling. She faced off against 8 other contestants for the title of Ms. Silve Davao 2017 in the Davao City Mall run by the New City Commercial Corporation. In June 2018, she placed second. From September 2017 until January, she took part in the yearly fashion show. She served as a marketing consultant for Gaisano shopping centers in Davao City, General Santos City, Tagum, Toro, and Digos in 2019. Christine has had a rich and satisfying life. Her life's ambition was realized in February 2019. She relocated to Manila in order to begin working for Philippine Airlines subsidiary, PAL Express, as a flight attendant. Desserts from Christine. December 28, 2020, was my last flight as a flight attendant. Since Christine's passing was widely reported, a lot of debates and theories were developed among the community. At first, authorities believed that Kristen was probably murdered and abused by a group of men she was hanging out with on New Year's Eve. Makati City Police charged 11 men with assault and murder in the early stages, despite the lack of autopsy results and a toxicology report. The case was deemed closed by the Philippine National Police. Suspects were identified and charges were brought against those arrested. Although 3 of the partygoers were arrested, after turning themselves into the police, the forensic medical report provided the primary explanation for Christine's death. On January 3, 2021, Forensic Medical Officer Police Major Michael Nick S. Sarmiento oversaw the autopsy of Christine's remains at the Rizal Funeral Home in Pasay City. After the body of Christine Desera was examined, a forensic report was released, concluding that the ruptured aortic aneurysm was the cause of death. But it also noted a linear abrasion on the girl's right thigh, along with bruises on her right arm, right thigh, knees, ankles, and right foot. During the genital examination, deep-healed cuts and abrasions were also noted. A special investigation team was established to investigate the crime according to the National Capital Region Police Department. However, Christine's family refused to believe that a lively young girl could pass away too soon from natural causes. The family of Christine Desera revealed at a news conference on January 5, 2021, that they had read the autopsy report indicating that she died from an aneurysm. They did, however, claim that the autopsy was not complete and asked for another one. The deceased's parents have been attempting to figure out how Christine's aorta was torn. After all, the aneurysm was caused by violence or abuse, according to the police and the Desera Family Council, so it was not a natural death, and the offenders ought to face consequences. All 11 of the guys who spent the night with Christine were recognized by the prosecutor's office. She worked with some of them. Christine was meeting other young men for the first time. They were friends of her friends. As it happened, this party was started by Christine. She organized this party with her friends and had reserved the hotel room herself a few days beforehand. Although she was aware of her daughter's friendship with men, her mother Sharon never voiced any opposition. In their family, it was accepted as normal, since Kristen had always found it easier to interact and form friendships with men. It also became customary for her and her pals to meet up because they rarely took holidays at home. Kristen was able to call her family shortly after midnight each year to wish them a happy new year and to let them know about the event that was going on at the Makati Hotel. The family was able to observe Kristen's pals in the festive setting during the video conference. New rumors regarding the abuse claim have surfaced, though. The authorities were able to piece together the events of the case, virtually minute, by analyzing the hotel lobby footage, which served as the primary evidence of the occurrence. Note that Christine Desera reserved room 2209, which was the designated location for the party. In the late afternoon, the major action starts to take place. Christine moves from room 2209 to room 2207 at 11:21 p.m. The company goes back to their accommodation around 11:38 p.m. At 2:50 a.m. Christine goes last and is seen holding her shoes in a glass. Christine enters room 2207 while holding Valentine's hand, a new acquaintance. A hotel worker brings an extra mattress to room 2209 at 2:52 a.m. while they are at a neighbor's house, and Valentine goes with Christine to her room. Valentine is clearly intoxicated based on her demeanor. She is carrying a bottle in her hand and has an overly easy walk. The couple enters around 3:15 a.m. after the companions pause at the door and Christine gives Valentine a short kiss before the man swiftly pulls away. 6 minutes after Christine had rushed out of her room and into her neighbor's room, one of the guys departs. He goes to 2209, presumably to give his pals a call at 3:22 a.m. In the next room on the right side of the corridor, Christine Desera is seen talking to another man, while 2 more males pass by. She appeared distressed. After giving one of her friends a sudden embrace, Christine and her friend vanish completely from the camera's field of view. John Della Serna is seen escorting Christine back to the first room at 4:13 a.m. The camera catches Christine at the room's entrance once more, at 4:22 a.m. At 27:07, what brought her back there is unknown. After she nearly collapses, a man who resembles John Della Serna grabs her by the waist and brings her to room 2209. At 5:05 a.m., Christine appears to be somewhat inebriated. As Christine flees from a man who resembles Louis de Lima, the camera records her giggling. Later, they are outside of room 2207. At 6:23 a.m., Christine walks inside room 2209 with him and appears normal. For the final time, Christine appears on video alive. She is cognizant as Valentine carries her from room 2207 in his arms. Although the night was undoubtedly filled with events, the most significant reality is still hidden behind the scenes. The party went on until dawn, at around noon when Christine was discovered comatose in the bathtub. Her buddies continually tried cardiopulmonary resuscitation while carrying her to the ground. They tried unsuccessfully before calling the front desk for assistance. The head of security and the hotel management entered the room a few minutes later. Christine was lowered to the hotel's first floor using a wheelchair. Christine was escorted to the hospital by Romel Galita. Regretfully, the doctors simply mentioned the girl's passing. Romel delivered the dreadful news to Christine's mother over the phone, despite the fact that it appears to be a fun party and that it is difficult to fit so many people in one room. The investigators suspected that the young people were using illegal substances to increase the effects of the alcohol, as they frantically moved from room to room throughout the night. Some of the inmates stated, when questioned, that just whiskey and tequila were used during the party, and that no other illegal substances were present. It is important to note that the investigation's initial focus was illegal drugs because, according to one of the detainees' testimony, Christine had concerns about the drink's composition and hypothesized that someone might have added an unidentified chemical to spike them. Guests were instructed to bring their own food and beverages, it turned out, though the post-mortem report indicated that neither alcohol nor illicit narcotics ingested the night before her death would produce this type of aortic dilatation or defect. There was conjecture that Christine's drink was poisoned and might have caused the aneurysm that ultimately resulted in her death. Since there were no illegal substances or evidence of them in the room or the suspect's personal items, the substance information was ultimately deemed unsubstantiated. The 2009 search for possible evidence in the 2 rooms and the adjacent room did not produce the expected results, which at least partially demonstrated Christine Deserna's brutal death. When questioned, Mark Rosales and John Della Serna declared that they would never harm Christine and openly acknowledged their unusual orientation. John further disclosed that early in the morning, Christine was already throwing up, so they had to take her back from room 2207. According to Romel Galita, he discovered Christine in their room's bathtub at around 10 in the morning. Assuming she was asleep, he just covered her with a blanket. However, he discovered the girl was blue and not breathing around midday after he woke up and went back to wake her. He hurried to his pals for support. She was taken to Makati Medical Center per the hotel's recommendation, where she was declared dead upon arrival, allegedly as a result of an aortic aneurysm rupture. The Makati City Police were notified of the death by the hospital. By that time, other men from a nearby hotel room had departed. In a separate statement to the public on January 4, the Philippine National Police stated that, despite some missing information and contradictory claims, the case involving Christine Desera is nearly resolved. According to Police Chief Debold Sinas, 3 individuals have already been identified and taken into custody. The Makati City Prosecutor's Office ordered the release of the 3 males who are in detention on January 6 owing to a lack of evidence. even though other suspects were still being sought. The prosecution maintained that there was not enough evidence to prove Christine had been molested. They added that the police have not yet established that Christine Desera's death was due to abuse, even if it occurred. In addition, Christine was an extra lady at the party, which was a get-together of males with unconventional sexual orientations who were all flirting with one another. Most of the people at the party, including Rommel Galita, were Christine's co-workers and stewards, Sarah, at PL Airlines, demonstrating her familiarity with these individuals and their sexual orientation. The Makati City Prosecutor's Office opened a preliminary investigation on January 13, 2021, after an official autopsy verified that the 23-year-old's cause of death was a ruptured aortic aneurysm. Additionally, the prosecutor's office demanded that the police make public the findings of the victim's toxicological report, histopathic research, and DNA analysis. The claim that her daughter was not abused, however, was disputed by Christine's mother, Sharon Desera. She stated during an appearance on a news program that a gang of men were abusing her daughter. If you're a mother and you see Christine's body, you'll likely understand the suffering she endured as a result of them. But my daughter is no longer able to speak because she is no longer alive. During the TV show, the woman voiced her opinion. As proof that the autopsy report was erroneous, Sharon pointed to the cuts and bruises on her daughter's body that were not included. Later, Christine's relatives stated that they wanted a second autopsy to refute the authorities' initial conclusion that she passed away naturally. The foundation was bruising and injuries that weren't noted in the initial report. Brick Reyes, a family representative, stated that there would be enough proof of Christine's torture from the wounds on her arms and legs, as well as from her remains. Additionally, according to Rick Reyes, they think the young lady was assaulted and drugged before to her passing. During the New Year's Eve celebration, Christine, who was already drunk, claimed that her drink appeared to have been tampered with. According to Christine's parents, they have lodged a complaint, calling for Michael Nix Armiento to be fired immediately for egregious carelessness and incapacity in creating Christine's death certificate and forensic report. Reporters were informed by Dr. Maurici Ramos, a friend of the Dosser family, that a second autopsy was performed on the deceased. He also underlined that the Death Investigation Unit has received the biological fluids retrieved from the second autopsy and will furnish further information following a final review and compilation of all the forensic team's results. The cause of death was consistent with a ruptured aortic aneurysm, according to the pathology post-mortem results from the Southern Police District Crime Lab Division's forensic report, which was then circulated on social media. According to the official autopsy, Christina was not mistreated the night before she passed away. The aorta was the real cause of Desera's demise. The deficiency weakened as a result of the aorta's continuous rise in blood pressure, and ultimately, the aorta burst. There was blood loss at the moment of the aortic rupture, according to the Philippine National Police Crime Lab report. Christine thus had a number of symptoms, including nausea, weakness, and perspiration. Within a few hours, she died from the blood loss brought on by the aortic rupture. According to the report, this indicates that the girl had an aortic aneurysm that ruptured, causing the lower portion of the aorta, the primary vessel that delivers blood to the entire body, to grow. This conduit passes through the chest and belly after leaving the heart. The aorta is the largest conduit in the body, so if it bursts, as it did in this instance, a person could lose a significant amount of blood and possibly pass away. The fact that Christine's aneurysm did not happen recently was also mentioned. It began many years ago. According to the article, dilatation existed long before she passed away and is a chronic illness. Even if she hadn't passed away that tragic night, she would have perished in any situation when her blood pressure would have increased to the point where the aneurysm ruptured. Christina Desera's undetected hypertension was further confirmed by the autopsy, which also showed that her heart was larger than a healthy heart. Although it is generally accepted that the girl died of natural causes, the 11 young men who attended the party and genuinely attempted to provide Christine with first aid were shamed and persecuted as criminals as a result of the pervasive false information. Since then, all 11 of the men who were initially charged have been freed. In an attempt to correct the problem, the Makati City Prosecutor's Office stated that suitable proof could not be obtained at the time of the publicity, and that the evidence offered was insufficient to prove that Christine Desera had been abused. As a result, they had to construct a version based on indications of the victim's physical decline. Two further suspects also claimed that they were coerced by the police into making up a story about the presence of illegal narcotics at the scene party on New Year's Eve. Another tale participant described how his kiss with Christine, which was caught on camera the night before she passed away, was captured. The man claimed that Christine was the one who started it, but he made an effort to push her away. When the flight attendant's body was discovered, law enforcement officials came under fire for failing to do a comprehensive toxicological analysis. The men's charges were ultimately withdrawn for lack of evidence, due to suspicious circumstances that appeared to contradict the Philippine National Police's findings. Christine Desera's death garnered a lot of public attention. As further information emerged from Christine's family, who were unable to accept the reality and believe in their daughter's natural death, her story began to garner a lot of attention online. In an attempt to secure justice for her daughter Sharon, the girl's mother made a plea to President Rodrigo Duterte. "I'm just a regular person. You have a daughter as well. Since I don't want anyone to suffer from the same brutality and cruelty as my Christine, I want to speak out publicly." More than a week after Christine Desera's passing, her friends and co-workers sent condolence messages, reposts, and farewells over social media. She was interred at Forest Lake Memorial Park, in her birthplace of General Santos. In the end, Christine Desera's unusual situation is a perfect illustration of how the media may disseminate false information and how it can influence both the public and the individuals involved. The story's goal as it nears its conclusion is to return to the truth, which will eventually, in one form or another, assume its rightful place. Even though there is just one truth, Christine's family continues to believe that these individuals killed the girl and that there is a mystery behind this tale. For my part, I don't understand, and couldn't find any information regarding Christine's body wounds and bruises. Why was it kept quiet? Despite having cuts and bruises, it appears that Christine's death was caused by an aortic rupture, brought on by heart disease rather than by those injuries. As a result, they ignored her body's wounds. You guys are the judge. However, I think there are a lot of strange and inconsistent things in this case. I hope Christine's family comes to terms with the irreversible loss, because young men, guilty or not, will spend the rest of their life remembering the same depressing tale and coming up with justifications. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Vicky Belk, a young mother, vanished in Charles County, Maryland in August 1979. Later, evidence of a vicious kidnapping, sexual assault, and deadly shooting was found on her body in a remote wooded area. The community was rocked by the horrible crime, and Vicky's family was left with unsolved questions and indescribable sorrow. A lack of leads, witnesses, and forensic evidence caused the case to go cold despite investigators' best efforts. After decades without a conclusion, an unexpected arrest was made in 2023 thanks to advances in DNA. What made the offender carry out this heinous deed? Will Vicky and her loved ones receive justice at last? Let's dive right in. A paradox exists in Suitland, Maryland, which is a census-designated community in Prince George's County. It appears to be a quiet town that offers a blend of suburban and urban living, making it an ideal place to raise a family. The community's residents love to spend their weekends in the well-known parks in the area, where they can take in the serene atmosphere and stunning scenery. Beneath this serene exterior, Suitland has a higher crime rate than the national average. It is comparable to both small rural towns and large metropolitan areas that face high crime rates. The community's safety and the steps required to address its higher crime rate are called into question by this striking disparity. It started like any other day in Suitland on August 27, 1979. The community was bathed in a warm glow as the sun rose above the peaceful streets. Vicky Belk, 28, and her boyfriend James Hill were having a typical Monday morning. They got up, ate breakfast, and prepared to work at the offices of the Department of Agriculture. They drove James's 1972 Buick out of their apartment and began their journey. making a partial stop at Stadium Armory Station before continuing on into Washington, D.C. For the last portion of their trip, they chose to get out of the car and ride the metro. Vicky reminded James that she would be running errands during her lunch break that morning before they parted ways. James bid them farewell quickly and went on with his work, oblivious to the tragedy that lay ahead. When James finished his work for the day, Vicky intended to meet him in the parking lot and take the subway back to the car. James accepted the plan, believing it to be simple, and promised to see her soon. Without suspecting anything unusual, he said this. But when James got off work that afternoon, he was unable to locate Vicky or his vehicle in the parking lot. He glanced around, but neither she nor the car was there. As the minutes passed, he began to worry that perhaps she was running late. He thought she might be back at their apartment, so he found another way home, but she wasn't there either. There was silence when he called her name. James frantically called every friend and relative of Vicky's he could recall throughout the night. In the hopes that someone would know where she might have gone, he asked each person if they had any idea. However, nobody appeared to be aware of her location, so James was left with only more concerns and questions. James was not reassured by this. He was unsure of what to think or do. He had been clueless about Vicky's whereabouts the entire day and night. By the following morning, James's concern had escalated into a desperate situation. He called the Prince George's County Police because he was so concerned. He informed them that he had not seen his girlfriend in almost 24 hours and that he was now deeply worried about her safety. He wanted to locate her and safely bring her home with the assistance of the police. James attempted to report his girlfriend Vicky missing to the Prince George's County Police Department early on August 28, 1979, but the authorities informed him that an official report could only be made 72 hours after Vicky's disappearance because she was an adult. For James, it was infuriating and unbelievable. How come the police didn't act right away? All he could do was wait and hope that Vicky would come back, which was an agonizing thought. As he considered all the horrible things that might be happening to her, each minute seemed to drag on forever. When he informed Vicky's family, they became very concerned, particularly Vicky Belk, Vicky's mother. Maydell was a strong woman who became anxious and scared because she was unable to comprehend what was happening. She couldn't stop thinking about how dependable and responsible Vicky had always been, and how it wasn't unusual for her to call or let her loved ones know where she was going. Vicky's failure to check on her son was definitely out of the ordinary, and Maydell's mind was churning with the worst-case scenarios. As Vicky's family awaited news, the uncertainty was intolerable. Their fear increased as each hour seemed to drag on forever. Their anxiety grew during the 72-hour waiting period. As they waited for the police to intervene, their minds were racing with horrible ideas and anxieties, and they felt helpless and dreadful. Vicky Lynn Belk, the oldest of 6 children in the close-knit Belk family, was born on March 20, 1951, to proud parents Lonnie and Maydell Belk. Vicky assumed a nurturing role as the responsible and caring oldest sibling, showing kindness and devotion to her younger brother Lonnie Jr., also known as Ricky, and her 4 younger sisters, April, Grenda, Judy, and Kay. The Belk family's children were raised in the lovely Virginian city of Alexandria. Vicky and her sister Judy broke the color barrier at George Mason Elementary School in Alexandria, making history as the first African-American students to do so. For upcoming generations of African-American students in the community, this groundbreaking accomplishment cleared the path. They later received their degrees from T.C. Williams High School in 1969, which is evidence of their diligence and willpower. Vicky grew up in a family that steadfastly upheld their values and relentlessly battled for their rights during the unrestricted civil rights era. The Belk family persisted in seeking equality and justice in the face of hardship and discrimination. The community was inspired by the bravery of the Belk family. Vicky stood up for her community's rights and spoke out for what was right, just like her family did. She was a leader who sought to improve the justice and fairness of society. As a leader, Vicky was respected and idolized by her siblings. Her generosity and compassion, which were apparent in all she accomplished, drew them in. Vicky persisted and became the first person in her family to earn a college degree in spite of many challenges and few opportunities. She graduated from St. Augustine's College in Raleigh, North Carolina, with a Bachelor of Arts in Education in 1974. Vicky's skills and knowledge were recognized. Vicky began a successful career by breaking down barriers and accomplishing great things, and in 1979, at the age of 28, she landed a prestigious job as a management analyst in the Department of Agriculture's Office of Operations and Finance in Washington, D.C. Vicky, a single mother, put a lot of effort into raising her young son, Lamont Belk. She also had a time-consuming and hard-working job in Washington, D.C. Vicky volunteered at Oakland Baptist Church, where her great-grandfather was a co-founder, in spite of the difficulties. She had a strong religious and community commitment. Vicky's family always found time for one another, despite everything, because they were so close. Judy, Vicky's sister, married at Oakland Baptist Church in August 1979. To commemorate this momentous day, the entire family gathered. Vicky was a key player in the wedding preparations and served as Judy's maid of honor. James Hill, her boyfriend and co-worker at the Department of Agriculture, accompanied her to the wedding. Following the wedding, Vicky resumed her usual activities. She still put in a lot of work, looked after her son, and spent time with James. Nobody was aware of Vicky on August 29. Every lead seemed to end in disappointment for her family and friends who had been looking for her. They had no idea that their hopes would soon be dashed by a terrible discovery. At 7 p.m. on that fateful evening, a teenage boy from the area rode his bike down Metropolitan Church Road. In Maryland, he was riding close to the intersection of Route 227 when he noticed something. It was hard to see as he rode because of the long shadows cast by the waning daylight. However, he noticed something. He noticed a strange, still figure in the brush. His interest sparked him to get off his bike and approach the object carefully. His heart sank as he got closer. The body was dead. In a panic, the boy ran home to tell his mother about the horrifying discovery. She called the authorities right away. Authorities confirmed the heartbreaking fact that the remains were those of Vicky Lynn Belk at 910, who acted quickly after reaching the scene. Vicky's body was found about 20 feet from the road in a wooded area. She appeared to be in a desperate attempt to repel an assailant because she was lying on her back with her legs outstretched and her fists clenched close to her collarbone. She was shot in the head and died as a result. Unexpectedly, the medical examiner's further investigation revealed that Vicky had experienced sexual assault. Vicky's parents, Lonnie and Maydell Belk, were contacted by the Charles County Sheriff's Office and asked to visit the police station. They made a suggestion that they knew something about Vicky. Lonnie and Maydell came with mixed feelings, hoping that maybe Vicky was just hurt and had been located at last. But when they got to the sheriff's office, their hopes were dashed. They couldn't handle the heartbreaking news they got. They had brutally attacked, killed, and mercilessly abandoned their firstborn daughter on the side of the road. Following Vicky's horrific murder, her family was overcome with trauma and grief. The man who did this to her daughter was cursed by her mother. They were completely traumatized by the violent and disorderly nature of the crime. They gathered themselves in spite of their suffering and trusted the detectives with the case, hoping that Vicky's killer would be apprehended and given a fair punishment. Detectives secured the crime scene, carefully looked for clues, and gathered evidence as part of the immediate investigation into the homicide. Vicky's pantyhose, brown shoes, hair samples, nail clippings, jewelry, bra, dress, and slip were among the items the detectives found at the crime scene. Despite being extensively tested several times, these items sadly failed to provide any noteworthy leads for the investigation. In addition, the detectives interviewed Vicky's family, co-workers, and witnesses to the crime scene innumerable times. However, despite following up on a number of leads, the investigation didn't appear to be moving forward. In the hopes that it would contain a vital clue that would help them find Vicky's killer, the detectives were still looking for James's car, which she had borrowed to run errands the day she vanished. Within a few days, James's Buick was discovered abandoned in Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, though, no evidence of the murderer was found. Even though there were no new developments in the case, the detectives were committed to finding Vicky's killer. In the hopes that it would eventually result in a breakthrough, they meticulously preserved every piece of evidence. Additionally, they were hoping that technological advancements would eventually aid in solving the case in the upcoming years. The case was further hampered by the lack of forensic resources and investigative methods at the time. Given the time period, other lines of inquiry were either non-existent or very limited. Detectives from Charles County and Maryland State Police worked together to re-examine the evidence in Vicky's case. To make use of cutting-edge technologies, they also collaborated with Sorensen Forensics in Salt Lake City, Utah, and Bode Technology in Lorton, Virginia. Together, they sought to solve the case and provide fresh insight into Vicky's killer. But they once again found themselves disappointed. The identity of Vicky's killer remains a mystery, as the investigation into her assault and murder gradually came to a standstill. DNA testing technology was not developed until the 1980s, and it was not in use when Vicky was tragically killed in 1979. After it surfaced, authorities started building a nationwide database of fingerprints and DNA samples from people accused of crimes. But until the 2000s, despite continuous research, no notable advancements were made. Advances in DNA technology by the early 2000s enabled detectives to re-examine the evidence in Vicky's case. Investigators were able to develop a possible suspect profile after re-examining Vicky's dress and finding a foreign bodily fluid. Even though testing technology had advanced, it still needed a lot of work. The created profile was judged inappropriate for comparison with suspects or database entry. Over the years, detectives continued to retest Vicky's possessions using new technologies, unfazed by previous failures. But in spite of their best efforts, no noteworthy progress was made, and the case was once again unsolved, leaving Vicky's family with unresolved questions. However, new evidence was found in 2022 when Vicky's clothing was re-examined with the aid of new technology. Important hints that had been overlooked for decades were made clear by this discovery. A male's DNA profile connected to the crime scene was discovered. This important finding gave investigators new hope that Vicky's killer would be apprehended at last. An important turning point in the case was reached when the new DNA profile was compared to profiles in the Combined DNA Index System, CODIS. When Noel Gehrman learned of a DNA match connecting Andre Taylor to the evidence gathered in Vicky's case on November 1, 2022, it was a momentous occasion. This crucial discovery led detectives to look into Taylor's past and his ties to Bryan's Road, Maryland, the scene of the crime, as he was a 62-year-old convicted criminal from Washington, D.C. Detectives found that Taylor's address on his arrest records from the 1980s was Bryan's Road, 4 miles from the location where Vicky's body was found. The investigation also showed that Taylor's DNA was added to the national database after he was arrested and found guilty of violent crimes in Washington, D.C. This important discovery strengthened Taylor's connection to the case even more. Once Taylor was identified as the suspect, the next task for the investigators was to find him. Detectives worked in conjunction with law enforcement partners from the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department Homicide, the U.S. Homeland Security Investigations, and the U.S. Baltimore Field Office of the Secret Service to find him. After months of unrelenting search, investigators eventually found Taylor in Washington, D.C., where he was living in a nursing and rehabilitation center. In order to get proof, detectives kept a close eye on him and gathered more details about his past. In March 2023, detectives visited Andre at the nursing home with a warrant in order to obtain a saliva sample for a new DNA comparison with the evidence from the crime scene. Detectives weren't worried about Andre running away because of his poor health and amputated leg. Even though the unexpected visit made him aware of his suspect status, the results of lab tests would not be available for weeks, and authorities were certain he posed no flight risk. Andre Taylor's life took a turn for the worse as he grew older. Even though Taylor had never met Vicky Belk, his actions would eventually bring him back to her case decades later. After killing a man during a street robbery in April 1989, Taylor was charged with murder. The prosecution contended that Taylor should be detained without bail, citing his lengthy criminal history. He had at least 10 prior convictions for drug and gun possession in his criminal history. Taylor received a substantial sentence of 5 to 15 years in prison because he was a repeat offender, even though he was only found guilty of carrying a pistol without a license in the homicide case. Following his release, Taylor made several arrests in the 2000 system and kept circling back and forth through the criminal justice system. Taylor's DNA was added to the federal database at some point during this time. This crucial entry would ultimately connect Taylor to Vicky Belk's murder, providing her family with some closure and justice for her heinous murder. A grand jury heard the case from the Charles County State's Attorney's Office on June 16, 2023, and after considering the evidence, found Andre Taylor guilty of 3 serious charges: first-degree rape, first-degree murder, and second-degree rape. 6 days later, on June 22, Taylor was arrested in Washington, D.C. by a team of detectives from the Charles County Sheriff's Office, the United States Marshal's Service, and the Metropolitan Police Department. Taylor was first detained in a Washington, D.C. detention facility before he consented to return to Charles County on June 27. Vicky Belk was 28 years old, and Andre Taylor was 18 when she was murdered in 1979. There is no proof that Andre Taylor and Vicky Belk were acquainted, according to a careful analysis of the original report and follow-up investigations since 1979. Furthermore, the Belk murder and the circumstances surrounding Taylor's arrests in Washington, D.C. are completely different. On June 22, 2023, Vicky Belk's family celebrated a momentous occasion. Vicky's family and detectives spoke to the media during a press conference after Andre Taylor was detained without bail. Although the tearful reunion brought back painful memories, it also brought closure. The family was content and joyful. "I thank God that we are alive and well to witness this historic occasion," Vicky's son said. "I was 7 years old in 1979. Vicky's family expressed their appreciation and treasured memories, saying, "Thank you to the court for holding this person in custody." Through their accomplishments and the establishment of the Vicky Belk Scholarship Foundation in 1980, they paid tribute to her legacy, in spite of the pain. About 100 students have benefited from the foundation, perpetuating Vicky's passion for youth and education. It wasn't over yet. Andre Taylor's sentencing was still pending for the family. Will this be the next one? After 45 years of waiting, will the family finally find peace? Will the memory of Vicky Lynn Belk be buried at last? In the decades-old murder case of Vicky Lynn Belk, a Charles County jury found Andre Taylor criminally liable for her untimely death and returned a guilty verdict on July 18, 2024. According to Assistant State's Attorney John Stackhouse, the 45-year-long incident resulted in generational trauma. Belk's son was raised without a mother figure. Her daughter had to be buried by her parents. Not knowing who killed their daughter, her parents were forced to lie on their deathbeds. There was never an opportunity for her grandchildren to meet their grandmother. However, throughout this case, I have never witnessed a family with such grace, grit, and determination. After decades of evading justice, Andre Taylor was finally held accountable for his horrible crimes. Taylor acknowledged raping Vicky Belk during a detective interview, but he denied having anything to do with her death. Nevertheless, indisputable proof revealed his guilt and connected him to the crime. A 4-decade wait for justice ended on August 25, 2024, at 12:30 p.m., when Andre Taylor was sentenced to life in prison for the horrific first-degree murder of Vicky Lynn Belk. He would be imprisoned for the remainder of his life because the consequences of his crimes had finally caught up with him. I can't thank the assistant state's attorneys enough for their tireless efforts to bring justice to this case, said State's Attorney Tony Covington, who praised the team. The Belk family had been waiting for justice for 45 years, and this was the culmination of a long and agonizing journey. Even though Vicky wouldn't return, it provided closure and explanation. Vicky's legacy would endure, proving the strength of tenacity. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. A person's life can be completely transformed by the emotion of love. It can be tender and loving, or it can be hurtful and disappointing. Almost everyone has times in their lives when they meet someone who becomes special to them, but occasionally these relationships don't work out as planned. In this tale, a man and a woman fell in love, but their relationship ended because of a well-publicized investigation. What transpired between them? For what reason were their parents against their relationship? This video will teach you the answers to these questions. I want to start by saying that this is one of the most unbelievable stories I have ever posted on my channel. Why do those who are meant to protect and serve act indifferently? And everyone will be shocked by this story's conclusion. We will therefore talk about what happened in Kemerovo, Russia, in 2020. The administrative hub of the Kemerovo Oblast is the sizable Russian city of Kemerovo. It is located in western Siberia's southern region. It is one of the biggest cities in Siberia, with a population of over 500,000. On September 24, 1997, Vera Pectalva was born in Kiselyovsk, Kemerovo Oblast. She developed into a happy, imaginative adult. She enjoyed singing and she won several competitions while she was in school. Despite their divorce while she was in school, Vera's parents, Oksana and Yevgeny, remained friendly. Vera got along well with her mother's new husband and her father's new wife. She was characterized as a non-confrontational, upbeat, and kind individual. As previously mentioned, Vera was a creative person, so her family was taken aback when she chose to attend the State Technical University in Kemerovo after high school graduation, rather than pursue a career in the arts. Vera spent her free time visiting her mother, Oksana, who lived in Kiselyovsk, approximately 110 miles from Kemerovo. Vera met a man her own age, Vladislav Kanius, during one of these visits in 2016. The total opposite of Vera was Vlad, as everyone called him. He was reclusive, irritable, and lacked life goals. Vlad was raised in a dysfunctional household and left school after the 9th grade. He lived with his father after his mother abandoned her family. But the challenges in his life did not stop there. In the end, his father committed suicide as a result of his legal troubles. Vlad was profoundly affected by everything that transpired in front of his eyes. Vera fell in love with Vlad despite the fact that they had little in common. Vera's parents opposed this relationship because they were aware of Vlad's identity. Of course, the guy's life wasn't easy, and we felt sorry for him, but we wanted a completely different life for Vera. We disapproved of her choice. We waited for her to end this relationship, Oksana, her mother, said. Vera's father asked her to break up with Vlad after learning about him. But Vlad and his daughter remained together. She simply ceased discussing him with her parents. Vera's mother, Oksana, recalled, "Vlad was never at our family gatherings. He was not in the photos on Vera's social networks. It was like she was hiding him." An essential fact to note here is that Vera and Vlad moved into Kemerovo together in 2019. Vlad, who was unemployed and did not want to change that, loved living with Vera, and her parents helped pay for the apartment. She was intelligent, attractive, and always had cash in her pocket. She gave him financial support. The couple's relationship was strained. It was obvious that Vlad would not stop abusing alcohol. Her parents thought Vlad had beaten her. Vera ultimately made the decision to end this toxic relationship in November 2019, but her boyfriend was adamantly against it. As previously stated, Vera and Vlad shared an apartment that was partially funded by her parents. In November 2019, Vera made the decision to break up with Vlad. According to logic, Vlad ought to have moved out. He was not going to do it, though. He enjoyed living at the expense of others. This is a passage from Vlad's testimony. It will help you understand what transpired after Vera made the decision to break up with him. However, keep in mind that this is Vlad's testimony. Whether or not you believe what he says is up to you. He stated in his testimony, "On December 15, 2019, I got into a fight with Vera because she wouldn't let me go to a nightclub. Throughout our relationship, Vera started to frequently leave for Kiselyovsk and gradually started to distance herself from me, telling me that she was talking to someone else. Don't forget that a month prior to that, Vera told Vlad that she was ending their relationship. We continued to live in the same apartment during this period, and I also learned that she was seeing someone else through our mutual friend, who informed me that Vera was seeing another man, Alexander, from Kiselyovsk, whom I did not personally know. I wanted to speak with Vera after learning that she was seeing Alexander. After our argument on December 15, 2019, she left and took some items with her, but I kept in contact with her over the phone, and on January 12, 2020, I called Vera and offered to help her move her remaining possessions to a different apartment. Vera accepted my offer to meet and move things, and we decided that I would assist her with the move. We decided to meet in the afternoon on January 13, and she was to come to me for her belongings. On January 13, 2020, At approximately 4 or 6 p.m., Vera arrived, and we packed her and my belongings since I wanted to leave this apartment as well and didn't want to live there without Vera. We drank beer, liqueur, and vodka while packing, and afterward I felt inebriated, and Vera was too. We drank until 5 in the morning on January 14, 2020. We didn't have any arguments while we were drinking, but when I started talking to her about our relationship, suggested that we should get back together, and revealed that I knew she was seeing another man, we started to argue. She didn't like it, so she began to curse, insult me, and hit me, specifically kicking me at least 5 times in the groin and hitting me in the face with her palm at least 8 times. I didn't feel any pain when she slapped me, but I did feel pain when she kicked me between the legs, which is how Vera began hitting me first, and I was upset because she had lied and claimed she wasn't seeing another man. Vera continued to insult me while claiming that I was intruding on her personal life because I was well informed about her. Vlad told the police that version of events. We'll then go over the opposing viewpoint, which provides compelling evidence that Vlad was dishonest in his testimony. Take note of this statement. We drank alcohol until 5 a.m. on January 14, 2020. There were no conflicts between us in the process of drinking alcohol. Vera had no intention of sharing the apartment with Vlad, much less partaking in alcohol. She requested a friend's assistance with the move. Vera left her friend a voicemail at 5:08 p.m. She claimed to have already arrived at the apartment and was gathering her belongings. She promised to arrive at her new apartment around 6 o'clock. Vera requested assistance from a friend to move her belongings from the taxi to the apartment. Vera left another voicemail 3 minutes later. She asked her friend to assist her with the move by coming to the apartment where she and Vlad shared. But before Vera could finish, Vlad interrupted, saying, "No one's coming in here." As a result, he opposed Vera's friend visiting the apartment. 4 minutes later, at 5:15 p.m., Vera asked her friend to come in a low voice, suggesting that things had gotten out of hand. This message appears to have been a request for assistance. She purposefully spoke quietly so Vlad wouldn't hear her. Vlad's commanding voice can be heard once more, at 5:25 p.m., when Vera sent another voicemail. He advises Vera's friend to wait for Vera to text her and not to bother them. Vlad recorded the voicemail himself at 7:19 p.m. Vera was unable to use her phone from that point on. The monster and she were left alone. But we must explain what happened next. The dreadful screams emanating from apartment 738 began to wake up the neighbors on the same floor at around 3 in the morning. A witness referred to the events as a massacre. 15 people gathered in the hallway outside the apartment because the screams were so loud. Among them was Vlad's brother. Since his brother had previously threatened to kill Vera, he recalled Vlad's words and understood that they would have to smash down the door. Since the apartment's door was iron, the neighbors began gathering tools to pry it open. Vera's heartbreaking sobs had been coming from the apartment all along. Eventually, the emergency service calls that people made were included in a different investigation. 30 minutes later, the police were still nowhere to be found. The event ended at 6:30 a.m. People called the police during these 3.5 hours, but nobody responded to Vera's call for help. While Vera was fighting for her life, the witnesses called the emergency services 7 times, but no one answered. Vlad was the last person to speak to them from behind the door. The neighbors eventually located a crowbar in a nearby parking lot and broke down the door after he said, "Vera, forgive me. I love you very much." Vlad was in the restroom by now, and Vera was already dead. He was inebriated. 112 operators were discussing life, laughing, drinking tea, and were extremely upset that they were being bothered, while Vera was suffering a terrible death at the hands of her ex-boyfriend, and the neighbors were futilely attempting to contact the police for assistance. It was only after Vera's death that the police showed up. They will later allege that one car ran out of gas and that no officers were available because everyone was attending to other calls. Consequently, the police officers who were on duty that evening and the 112 operators were also put on trial. The police station video was released while the investigation was underway, but translating it into English is pointless. One word sums it up for me: indifference. And even without subtitles, it is obvious. Recall that Vlad stated in his testimony that he and Vera did not have any disagreements until 5 in the morning, but the forensic analysis revealed that he was lying. 6 hours prior to her demise, Vera sustained her initial injuries. At around midnight, that is, it indicated that she had been beaten and injured by Vlad Knus for 6 hours prior to her passing. She had stab wounds among the approximately 100 injuries on her body. She had broken ribs and a nose. Her neck also had marks from strangulation. And prepare yourself if you were surprised by the police's inaction. You won't be any less surprised by what happened next. At the funeral of Vera Pectalva, over 1,000 people showed up. Not everyone could be accommodated in the church. Vera's mother, Oksana, claims that despite the funeral home's 4-hour makeup attempt, she was still unable to identify her daughter. Her injuries were that severe. Vlad Knus, meanwhile, was providing his version of events to the investigators. Naturally, he made an effort to minimize his involvement in this crime. Regarding that evening, he stated, "She didn't like it when I brought up our relationship, suggested that we get back together, and told her that I knew she was seeing another guy. She then began to curse, insult me, and hit me, specifically kicking me at least 5 times in the groin and hitting me in the face with her palm at least 8 times. When she slapped me, I didn't feel any pain, but when she kicked me between the legs, I felt pain. This is because Vera began hitting me first, which infuriated me because I knew everything about her, and she lied when she said she wasn't seeing anyone else. She kept insulting me during this time, so I became enraged and struck her with my palms several times, hitting her head about 4 times, but with little force. When I struck Vera, she fell to the floor, hitting the closet, and she struck me back, specifically hitting my head with her fists and palms, which hurt. I asked her to stop, but she didn't, and I recall that she scratched my back. I then grabbed her by the neck, and after noticing an iron on the floor, I wrapped the iron cord around Vera's neck, tightened it a little, and squeezed her neck for 1.5 minutes or 2. I didn't want to kill Vera, and I didn't know at the time that what I was doing could do so. I was tightening the cord around her neck to frighten her, to make her lose consciousness, to put her to sleep. She began coughing and wheezing for 15 minutes after I took the cord off her neck. Vera was in a prone position when I took the cord off her neck, but I later placed her on her back. At that point, she was unconscious, but she was also making noises, i.e. wheezing, and I assumed she was okay. Vera was not responding when I tried to wake her up, so I put my ear to her mouth and then to her heart to check if her heart was beating. She had no pulse and was not breathing. I don't recall what happened next, but I do recall that I ended up in the bathroom at one point while holding a knife. After a while, the door to the apartment opened and my brother and a policeman were inside, and then I was told to get dressed and taken to the police station. I had a knife with me because I wanted to hurt myself, and I didn't want to live because I knew Vera was dead. I want to apologize to Vera's family for what I did, and I acknowledge that my actions were the reason behind her death. I didn't intend to kill her. Vlad has a selective memory, as you have observed. He recalled strangling Vera, but he couldn't recall how he hurt her roughly 100 times. Furthermore, it was unclear how Vera, lying on her stomach on the floor, could have scratched his back and punched him in the face. It also became evident during the interrogation how Vlad's brother got to the scene of the crime. He lived in a different city after all. Vlad told the police the following. "I called my brother. I told him about what happened. I told him that Vera wasn't breathing, and my brother told me to call an ambulance and give her CPR. I tried to give her first aid. I tried to give her CPR and cardiac massage. He called his brother around midnight and threatened to kill Vera, according to information uncovered during the investigation. When questioned again about Vera's injuries during the second interrogation, he responded as follows. I admit that I caused Vera all of the injuries listed in the report, and I did not count the number of blows I delivered, but I may have been responsible for the injuries the expert discovered on her body. I don't recall how many times I struck her, but I believe it was the same amount. She screamed and insulted me during our argument, and I didn't like hitting her. When I did hit her, I didn't like her screaming, so I wanted her to stop talking. At the time, I didn't consider her suffering." Vlad Knus added that he and Vera had agreed to be intimate that night. Since it was impossible to prove the opposite, the charges associated with this were eventually dropped. Negligence charges were brought against emergency service providers and police officers. Unbelievably, they were not suspended from their jobs while the investigation was underway. They persisted in providing absurd justifications for their actions. For each of the 5 defendants, the prosecutor sought actual prison sentences. But the judge made a different decision. They were given suspended sentences ranging from 1.5 to 2 years. Additionally, the court mandated that each give the victims roughly $350. The police department also had to pay about $11,000 at the same time. Although the ruble is the currency of Russia, I have converted all amounts to US dollars so that everyone can understand them. According to the indictment, the police officers had gasoline, and even if they hadn't, they still ought to have taken the proper action to address the situation. However, they didn't view arriving at the scene as an urgent matter. Both police officers did not confess to any wrongdoing and refused to assist with the investigation. They claimed that the investigation team was at another address where a man's body had been discovered earlier when witnesses called to report the woman's screams and cries for assistance. It's likely that we will never find out what actually transpired that evening. Vera had no intention of residing in the apartment. She even asked a friend to assist her in moving. Thus, there is every reason to believe that Vlad poured alcohol into Vera's mouth while she was unconscious, or forced her to drink it. He had time to devise a story that would demonstrate that everything that occurred was accidental. Vlad Canius was given a 17-year prison sentence by the court in the summer of 2022. He partially acknowledged his guilt. Additionally, he was mandated to make a compensation payment of roughly $45,000. Vera's parents were shocked by what transpired next. Since they felt that 17 years was a very light sentence for what Canius had done to their daughter, they intended to appeal the decision. But Vlad was not even imprisoned for a year. Pictures of Canius in uniform were broadcast on the network in November 2023, and it was revealed in April 2023 that he had been pardoned by the president following 6 months of involvement in the war. You are all aware of the nature of the conflict Russia is currently embroiled in. Additionally, he was released from having to compensate Vera's parents in any way. In Russia, Vera Pectalva's case has generated a lot of interest. Not less poignant was the news of Vlad Canius's pardon. The Russian president's press secretary said the following about it. There is a specific process for pardoning, and we have discussed it on numerous occasions. The first step is for the convicted individual to confess to his guilt. The Federal Bureau of Prisons makes the initial decision, followed by the regional level, the federal district, the Central Commission, and finally the president, who receives the documents for review. This is one method, and there is another in which prisoners, including those incarcerated for severe offenses, redeem themselves on the battlefield by using blood under shells and bullets. When Vera's parents found out that the person who killed their daughter was free and could start over, it's difficult to imagine how they felt. Such a chance will never come to their daughter. She was not given another chance. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Teresa Halbach vanished in October 2005 following her visit to the Avery Salvage Yard in Manitowoc County, Wisconsin. Although her car was discovered abandoned, the investigation quickly came to a standstill because the leads were unproductive. Police searched for the truth despite a number of unfounded theories and contradicting reports. As time went on, the case attracted national attention, sparking interest and inquiry. Family members and friends were in a desperate search for Teresa's whereabouts. What was Teresa's actual fate? Was something far more sinister responsible for her disappearance, or was it a tragic accident? Let's investigate this perplexing case. Teresa's small hometown was Calumet County, which is well known for its cheese. Teresa's early years and promising future were set against the tranquil and picturesque backdrop of the area. Born on March 22, 1980. Teresa Halbach was raised in Wisconsin's Calumet County. Prior to her life being tragically cut short at the age of 25, She was a young woman with a bright future. She was raised on a dairy farm as one of 5 siblings in a loving household. Teresa was a remarkable student, in addition to being a girl from a small town. She came home to begin her life after graduating from the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay in 2002. Teresa, who lived in a farmhouse next door to her parents and was still figuring out what she wanted to do with her life, was like many people in their 20s. She spent a lot of time with her parents and siblings and was close to them. She even served as the volleyball coach for her younger sister. They enjoyed spending time together on the family farm, watching Extreme Makeover and hanging out. She had always had a passion for photography, which she turned into a career in 2005. Teresa was a freelance photographer who documented events and weddings. She even took pictures of cars for sale while working for Autotrader.com, an American online marketplace for auto buyers and sellers. She first met Stephen Avery through this freelance work, and he hired her to photograph a car at his family's auto salvage yard. Wrapped automobiles, parts, and equipment were strewn all over the 40-acre Avery auto salvage yard. Their sister Barb lived on the property with her 3 sons, Brendan Dassey and her boyfriend Scott Taddick, while Stephen and his brother Charles managed the yard. Earlier in the year, Teresa had made multiple trips to the salvage yard to take pictures of cars for Stephen, but she wasn't particularly eager to return. According to reports, she once told a coworker that she found it unsettling that Stephen had answered the door while only wearing a towel. Who wouldn't be uneasy in that circumstance? On Halloween Day 2005, Teresa consented to return for one last photo session despite her discomfort. She would, regrettably, be seen alive for the very last time. Teresa Halbach showed up at the Avery salvage yard to take pictures of a car on the afternoon of Halloween 2005. She had a straightforward plan: take the pictures and go. But things took a turn for the worse, and Teresa's family reported her missing by November 3. She had gone to the salvage yard a few days ago and no one had seen or heard from her since. Concerns were raised when she failed to return her mother's calls. Teresa was a self-sufficient young lady with a busy life, and although her family was naturally concerned, they also assumed she might simply be out having fun. However, Teresa's family realized something was amiss when she disappeared for days at a time without speaking. Town volunteers came together to look for her, but they didn't make a significant finding until November 5th. Teresa parked her Toyota RAV4 on the Avery property. Strangely, wood, branches, and even the hood of another car were all over the car. Was the car concealed? That has been the subject of conjecture. The car appeared to have been attempted to be hidden, but it was unsuccessful. Why would anyone need to conceal a car when there are so many on the property? It made people wonder why the car was covered, but it was never made clear why. Police obtained a search warrant after finding Teresa's car at the Avery salvage yard, and between November 5 and November 12, they conducted 6 searches on the property. Police kept a close eye on Stephen Avery for the majority of the day. Officers seized a flatbed truck and a car from his family's retreat in the North Woods. Several troubling pieces of evidence were found during these searches. Investigators discovered burned bone fragments in a burn pit behind Stephen Avery's garage. These were subsequently determined by DNA testing to be Teresa's remains. Remains of Teresa's cell phone, Palm Pilot, and camera were discovered in a burn barrel on the property, and blood was discovered in the front and cargo sections of her RAV4. Police discovered 2 firearms, including a rifle, and Teresa's car key in Stephen Avery's bedroom during a search of his home. After several months, additional searches turned up a bullet and pieces in Avery's garage that were connected to the rifle that had been found in his house. Even though the bullet contained DNA evidence, it was still unclear whose DNA it belonged to, which led to more questions about the case. Although this body of evidence eventually strengthened the case against Stephen Avery, it raised controversy and left many questions unanswered. Stephen Avery made an initial statement without legal representation when he was questioned. That was the last time he saw her, he said. Law enforcement, however, soon began to doubt his account. Things quickly got out of hand when he was first arrested on suspicion of possessing illegal firearms on the property. On November 15, a few days later, Stephen Avery was formally charged with Teresa Halbach's murder. The amount of his bail was $500,000. Investigators had little reason to doubt the evidence, especially the blood, bones, car key, and firearm. The fact that Stephen Avery was no stranger to law enforcement is what makes his case so remarkable. This brings us to Stephen Avery's troubled past. He was raised on his family's 40-acre salvage yard in rural Gibson after being born in Manitowoc County in 1962. He had a reported IQ of 70 and struggled academically, attending special education classes. Avery served 10 months after being found guilty of robbing a bar when she was 18. He was imprisoned for a year in 1982 after being found guilty of animal cruelty for burning a cat alive. Avery was given a 6-year sentence in 1985 for threatening his cousin with a gun, but soon after, in 1985, Avery was falsely convicted of the vicious sexual assault and attempted murder of Penny Bjornson, marking the beginning of the most important chapter in his criminal history. Bjornson identified Avery despite his alibi and sentenced him to 32 years in prison. Avery was exonerated in 2002 after the Wisconsin Innocence Project took up his case and used DNA testing to prove that Gregory Allen was the real culprit. Avery was released in 2003 after serving 18 years. In order to recover $36 million for the erroneous conviction, he subsequently brought a civil suit against Manitowoc County and its representatives. When Teresa Halbach vanished in 2005, the lawsuit was still pending. In 2006, the case was resolved for $400,000. Investigators interviewed a number of people who lived or worked at the Avery salvage yard while Stephen Avery awaited trial for Teresa Halbach's murder. Stephen's 16-year-old nephew Brendan Dassey was one individual who attracted their attention. Although Brendan Dassey was not initially considered a suspect by the police in February 2006, they thought he might have some information regarding Teresa Halbach's disappearance. They believed he was keeping his uncle safe. However, Brendan started making statements during the interrogation that weren't consistent with the actions of an innocent person, which raised questions. Police believed Brendan had important information after an initial interview. Brendan had a borderline IQ, which is lower than the average. Brendan was 16 years old, but his comprehension and skills were more akin to those of a younger child. Brendan was interviewed twice more by investigators without his mother or legal representative present. They got his mother's approval prior to the last interview. The date of this controversial interview was March 1, 2006. Brendan admitted to taking part in Teresa's multiple-hour sexual assault, murder, and mutilation during this session. Brendan was told by police that they were already aware of the specifics. Brendan gave a detailed statement, clearly frightened. He said that after coming home from school, he was asked to enter his uncle's trailer where he discovered Teresa bound. As Teresa begged for assistance, his uncle allegedly encouraged him to sexually abuse her. Brendan claimed that his uncle convinced him to comply, and that after that, his uncle shot and stabbed Teresa. Brendan cut Teresa's throat at his uncle's order. A startling change occurred when Brendan was arrested and charged with sexual assault, murder, and corpse mutilation, but at that time, there was no supporting evidence for his confession. In any event, Stephen and Brendan were put on trial, and it went forward independently. The trial of Stephen Avery started first. Blood in Teresa's car, a spent bullet that matched Stephen's rifle and Teresa's DNA, and a key to her car discovered in Stephen's trailer that contained his DNA, were among the many pieces of evidence the prosecutors produced. Stephen's blood was found inside Teresa's car, and his DNA was found beneath the hood fastener. On Avery's land, Teresa's burned remains and possessions were discovered. Stephen made 2 calls to Teresa's cell phone, one with and one without the 67 feature to hide his identity, according to phone records. The 67 feature makes the call appear private or unknown and prevents your phone number from appearing on the recipient's caller ID. These sparked suspicions and implied that Stephen might not have known the 67 call could be traced by the police. Brendan's older brother Bobby Dassey testified that on the afternoon of Teresa's murder, he saw her making her way to Stephen's trailer. He also gave critical testimony after overhearing Stephen talking about Teresa's body disposal in a subsequent conversation. Stephen's defense team contended that Manitowoc County Police framed him because of his $36 million lawsuit against them, despite the evidence appearing to be against him. They claimed that police used evidence from a prior wrongful conviction case to plant blood in Teresa's car. The main evidence, according to the defense team, cast doubt on it. Only Stephen's DNA, not Teresa's, was present in the key to Teresa's car that was discovered in Stephen's trailer. This was odd, because the key to Teresa's car should have contained her DNA. It was possible that the key was planted and Stephen was framed because Teresa's DNA was missing and Stephen's DNA was present, indicating evidence tampering. The jury's decision was unambiguous. Stephen Avery was found guilty of all charges and given a life sentence. Brendan Dassey's trial, which lasted only a few days, came shortly after in April 2007. Brendan's confession was a key component of the prosecution's case against him, and its veracity was hotly contested. There are concerning indications when examining Brendan's police interview in detail. After being questioned for hours, he made statements that appeared to acknowledge his guilt, but many people thought they were fabricated and unreliable. Investigators questioned Brendan for more details after he described the alleged assault and murder. "That's all I can remember," Brendan said hesitantly when asked about Teresa's head injuries. The officer pressed him further and asked who had shot her in the head. After a while, Brendan acknowledged that he had done it. Brendan responded that he was unable to think of it at the moment when the officer questioned him about why he hadn't brought it up earlier. This conversation sparked worries that Brendan's answers might have been swayed by the investigators, who may have led him to divulge information that wasn't entirely consistent with his own memory. Brendan withdrew his confession during his trial and said he was under pressure from the police. At first, his involvement had been supported by physical evidence, such as bleach stains on his jeans. Brendan, however, provided a different explanation, claiming that the stains were the result of cleaning a garage rather than a crime scene. Notably, Brendan was not directly connected to Teresa's murder by any DNA or supporting evidence. Brendan's conviction raised questions about the fairness of his trial because it was based primarily on his dubious confession. Despite his lower intellectual capacity, he was tried as an adult at the age of 17. In 2048, he received a life sentence with the possibility of release. There were continuous discussions concerning the validity of his confession and the fairness of his conviction, which kept the case contentious. Avery's request for a new trial was denied by a state appeals court in August 2011, and the Wisconsin Supreme Court affirmed the ruling in 2013. In 2012, Avery was transferred to the Waupun Correctional Institution after 5 years of service at the Wisconsin Secure Program facility in Boscobel. Dassey's attorneys petitioned for his release in December 2015, claiming his confession was coerced and that he had incompetent legal representation. The documentary Making a Murderer, which followed the legal disputes between Stephen Avery and his nephew Brendan Dassey, was made available on Netflix in 2015. It questioned their guilt by looking into their arrests, trials, and convictions. Brendan's confession, the dubious evidence against Stephen, and the tense relationship between Avery and the local police force, which resulted in his erroneous conviction in the 1980, were the main topics of the series. Many people questioned whether Stephen and Brendan had fair trials after watching the documentary, which sparked a lot of discussion and drew a sizable audience. Although it highlighted potential injustices, some detractors believed it might have been biased and omitted important information. In 2016, Stephen Avery's case was taken on by famous lawyer Kathleen Zellner, who fought for wrongful convictions. A Chicago-based attorney named Kathleen Zellner ascended to the Hall of Fame by defending numerous people who had been unfairly convicted. With a track record of overturning convictions, Zellner started investigating alternative explanations for the case. She sought to demonstrate that other suspects might have been involved in Teresa Halbach's death and that the evidence used at trial did not support Avery's guilt. Together with her public advocacy, Zellner's efforts brought the case back into the public eye and maintained the debate over Avery's innocence. The process of making a murderer was not totally impartial. Some critics contend that the prosecution's decision to not participate distorted the facts. They allowed the documentary to mostly represent the defense's viewpoint and left many questions unanswered. Some viewers speculated that the prosecution's decision to remain out was made in order to avoid re-examining the validity of Avery's prior erroneous conviction. The documentary spurred discussion and increased awareness, but it omitted crucial information. For instance, it didn't go into detail about the calls Stephen Avery made to Teresa Halbach's phone, which some consider to be important pieces of evidence. Additionally, it ignored Teresa's prior interactions with Avery, including rumors that she felt uncomfortable around him. Additionally, Making a Murderer minimized Stephen Avery's past violent actions, especially against women. Even though this does not establish his guilt on its own, it does point to a troubling pattern of aggression that should not be disregarded when looking into the case. Important pieces of evidence, like the bullet that was discovered to have Teresa's DNA on it and that matched Avery's rifle, were also mostly overlooked in the documentary. Although this evidence was difficult to ignore, the series paid little attention to it. In Avery's case, the defense contended that the blood sample had been altered and revealed a hole in the stopper. However, a nurse later disclosed that the hole was a routine practice and that the seal had already been broken by Avery's defense team. In the end, the tampering claim was untrue. Additionally, Brendan Dassey's contentious interrogation was minimized in the documentary. Brendan, who has a mild intellectual disability, spent hours being questioned without his mother or attorney present. The reliability of his confession, which was crucial to his conviction, was called into question because it was erratic and appeared to have been influenced by leading police questions. There was no tangible evidence linking Brendan to the crime scene, despite the fact that his confession was essential to the prosecution's case. Thus, his conviction depended almost entirely on the confession, even though there were doubts about how it was obtained. The possibility that Brendan's statements were coerced, or that his age and intellectual limitations made him susceptible to manipulation, was not sufficiently addressed in the documentary. The documentary left viewers with more questions than answers, even though it may have ignited a global movement for justice. The question of whether these two men were genuinely guilty or the victims of a seriously defective legal system was once more complicated. Parts of Brendan's confession were later allegedly misplaced in the Making a Murderer documentary, which, when watched in its entirety, may provide additional insight into the way the police interrogated Brendan. Notwithstanding the media attention, the question still stands: what is the current status of the cases, and have Teresa Halbach and her family received justice? Brendan Dassey's supporters had hope when his conviction was momentarily overturned in 2016. The courts determined that his confession was not coerced, which was the primary question at hand. Experts contend that the courts did not fully take into account concerns regarding his age and intellectual disability, which raised concerns about his vulnerability during interrogation. 2018 saw the U.S. hopes for federal relief were dashed when the Supreme Court decided not to hear Brendan Dassey's case. His legal options are limited because the governor of Wisconsin has also declined to pardon him. His release is still uncertain, and many people still feel that justice has not been done, even though fresh evidence may reopen his case. On the other hand, even after Stephen Avery's appeals were repeatedly rejected, his case is still contentious. Kathleen Zellner, Avery's lawyer, is still arguing for a retrial and additional evidence testing, pointing to incompetent counsel and suppressed evidence. But thus far, these attempts have failed, and Avery's conviction remains. The legal issues Avery is facing appear to be challenging, even as Zellner keeps up her efforts on his behalf. His case has not yet produced any significant developments, and it is unlikely that his conviction will be overturned anytime soon in the absence of fresh evidence or modifications to the law. Although there is ongoing public discussion regarding the fairness of their trials and convictions, Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey are currently serving their sentences. Dassey is still seeking parole after her most recent application was turned down in 2021. Kathleen Zellner, Stephen Avery's lawyer, filed a motion for post-conviction relief in August 2022, arguing that fresh evidence might connect Brendan's older brother Bobby Dassey to Teresa Halbach's murder. This was a big step because it raised the possibility that Bobby was complicit in the crime. Zellner argued that if there were other credible suspects, it might lead to Avery's relief, even though this had been conjectured previously. This theory, however, begs the question of whether two different groups were involved in Stephen's framing, or if Bobby was collaborating with the police. Zellner presented an affidavit from Thomas Brez, a truck driver, who stated that he saw Bobby Dassey driving Teresa's RAV4 with someone other than Stephen in the passenger seat a few days after Teresa passed away. Although this testimony provides additional context, it does not prove Bobby's involvement in the murder. Furthermore, Bobby is not directly connected to the crime, despite his computer history containing searches for violent pornography. Additionally, Zellner cited Bobby's alibi, which was offered by Scott Tadich, his mother's boyfriend, a man with a criminal record and a reputation for being irritable. Zellner implied that Tadich might have been complicit in the crime, either by lying or by taking part in it. However, in the absence of concrete proof, this remains conjectural. Zellner has also looked into Teresa's ex-boyfriend Ryan Hillegas's involvement. Ryan was heavily involved in Teresa's search and lacked an alibi. Zellner thought it was strange that Ryan had access to Teresa's voicemail and had not told the police about his previous relationship with her. There isn't any concrete proof that Ryan was involved in the murder, though, despite these suspicions. The court rejected Zellner's request for a hearing based on these other suspects, finding that there was not enough evidence or motivation to imply that Ryan or Bobby Dassey were involved in Avery's framing. In essence, the court decided that the defense had failed to show how these people could have committed the crime or fabricated evidence. Avery was transferred to the medium-security Fox Lake Correctional Institution in 2022. Although the case is still complex, Zellner intends to appeal to the Wisconsin State Court of Appeals. In addition to voicing concerns about Brendan Dassey's coerced confession, some experts doubt Avery's innocence because of his violent past and possible corruption. There are still unanswered questions regarding Teresa Halbach's death and the family's ongoing legal battles, because the case has not been settled. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The son of a wealthy businessman, 6-year-old Robert Bobby Cosgrove Greenlease Jr., was abducted from his school, Notre Dame de Sion in Kansas City, Missouri, on September 28, 1953. As the authorities began a large search for the young boy, the city was engulfed in panic and commotion, but the abductor eluded capture. Soon after, Bobby's family started getting a flurry of phone calls and letters demanding an outrageous sum of money in exchange for their son's safe return. The case's twists and turns became even more startling as it attracted national notice. Who was responsible for the abduction? Was it a stranger or a member of the family? Would Bobby's family ever be reconciled with him if he were ever discovered alive? We are examining Bobby Greenlease's unsettling situation today. So let's go straight to the riddle without any more ado. With a population of over 500,000, Kansas City is situated in the western region of Missouri. It is Missouri's biggest city. With a variety of eateries, retail establishments, and entertainment venues, the Kansas City Power and Light District is one of the city's most recognizable attractions. The Kaufman Center for the Performing Arts and the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art provide visitors more opportunities to see the city's thriving art scene. It's difficult to forget the horrifying crime that previously took place in this city in the 1950s, though, despite all of the beauty and excitement. Multi-millionaire Robert Greenlease Sr. lived in Kansas City's affluent Mission Hills area and had it all. He was a vehicle dealer with locations all throughout the nation. Early in the 20th century, he brought General Motors automobiles to the Great Plains, which is how he made his money. The birth of his son, Robert Bobby Cosgrove Greenlease Jr., on February 3, 1947, at the age of 65, permanently altered his life. Robert's second wife was Virginia Pollock, Bobby's mother. The Greenlease family was loyal to their beloved Bobby and had a luxurious lifestyle. Virginia, his older sister, was born in 1941, therefore he wasn't an only child. In addition, he had a 1917-born half-brother named Paul. Robert's first marriage produced a son named Paul. Bobby was enrolled at the esteemed Notre Dame de Sion, a private Catholic school situated at 3823 Locust Avenue in Kansas City, when he was 6 years old in 1953. He developed alongside his contemporaries there. Bobby's future was bright and everything was going well, but destiny had other ideas for the young child and his family. On the morning of September 28, 1953, Bobby's school, Notre Dame de Sion, was much like any other day. Nobody could have predicted, though, how tragically this day would shortly turn out. When Sister Moran, the nun on duty that day, opened the school door at about 11 in the morning, she was met by a chubby woman who claimed to be Bobby's aunt. The woman revealed that Virginia, the boy's mother, had been taken to St. Mary's Hospital after suffering a heart attack while shopping at the Country Club Plaza. She continued by saying that she was told to take the boy to his mother right away by the Greenlease family. Sister Moran went to get Bobby from his classroom without thinking twice. The 6-year-old, who was naive and trusted people, had no reason to suspect the woman's identity or motivations. The nun watched as he took the woman's hand and they both climbed into a taxi and drove away. She figured everything was all right. Nobody realized that the woman wasn't Bobby's aunt. And what happened that day would forever alter the Greenlease family's course in life. Virginia will never forget the phone call she got less than an hour after the unidentified woman took Bobby. Another nun from Bobby's school, Sister Martha Anna, was on the other end of the telephone. She had called the family's residence to ask about Virginia's alleged heart attack. However, the nun was shocked to learn that nothing similar had occurred. Virginia had not suffered a heart attack and was not in the hospital. Both Virginia and the nun quickly realized that something evil was going on, and they quickly came to the conclusion that Bobby had been abducted. Virginia immediately called her husband Robert after speaking with Sister Martha over the phone and told him what had transpired. Like his wife, Robert was astounded and perplexed. As soon as possible, he reported the offense to the Kansas City Police Department. To help with the problem, the FBI was also called in. As word spread that Bobby had been abducted, panic swept the city. Despite launching a large manhunt, the authorities were unable to find the woman who had abducted the boy, which hindered their efforts. Hope started to wane as the hours passed. However, Bobby's parents received the first of many ransom notes on the same day that Bobby was seized. Signed by a person going by M, the letter requested $600,000, 0 cents, to ensure Bobby's safe return. It was an astounding sum of money, more than $6 million, 0 cents in today's dollars. The demands, however, did not end there. Additionally, M demanded that the ransom money be paid in $10, 0 cents, and $20, 0 cents small denomination notes. After learning of the ransom note, the authorities set to work finding the enigmatic M and securing Bobby's release. An additional ransom note arrived on September 29, 1953. This time, a pin Bobby had been wearing the day he was abducted was sent with the letter. Desperate to ensure his son's release, Robert made the decision to go collect the ransom money and sought assistance from connections and trusted friends. Among them was Commerce Trust Company Executive Vice President Arthur Eisenhower. In addition, he was the brother of the U.S. President at the time. Eisenhower made sure that all bank clerks handling the ransom money noted the bill's serial numbers, which were then published in newspapers across the nation. As Bobby's family continued to collect the astronomical ransom requested by the kidnapper, the excruciating wait for his safe return seemed to drag on forever. A man called the Greenlease home several times during this period to let Virginia know her son was still alive. Despite the family's desperation, the kidnapper appeared to relish his perverse game. 6 ransom letters and 15 phone calls were sent to the family in a week. Additionally, they consented to follow all of the kidnapper's directions, but they would quickly come to the realization that they had made a grave error. Robert amassed an incredible $600,000, 0 cents in ransom money for his son's safe return by the evening of October 4, 1953. The funds were then transferred to a bridge close to Highway 40, just east of Kansas City, in a duffel bag. At the time, it was the biggest ransom ever paid in American history. The kidnappers contacted the Greenleases early the following morning to verify that they had recovered the money and that Bobby would be returned in a day. However, no information on the boy's whereabouts was released as the day wore on. Anxiously, the family awaited any updates, but none arrived. The Greenleases were left to question whether the kidnappers had deceived them or whether their son was still alive. It felt like their darkest worries were going to come true, and the tension was excruciating. The most challenging and devastating period of their lives would be the following 24 hours. An ex-convict and taxi driver named Joe Carr was set to become a key player in the inquiry as Bobby's quest went on. In the state of St. Louis, a guy by the name of Carl Austin Hall had employed him as his personal driver. Carr was aware that Hall was a newcomer to the area and was spending money carelessly. Hall was living like a king after renting an apartment and purchasing new clothing. Carr chose to get in touch with his employer at the taxi firm Joe Costello because he was skeptical of Hall's actions. In addition to having links within the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department, Costello was a man with ties to the mob. On October 6, 1953, after the sun had fallen, Costello tipped Patrolman Elmer Dolan and Lieutenant Louis Shoulders about the man showing off a lot of cash in St. Louis. They hurried to Hall's residence where he was and took him into custody. The officers discovered 2 heavy metal suitcases stuffed full of cash inside the room. The sight was stunning. After that, Hall was taken to the Newstead police station in North St. Louis, where he was questioned by the police on the money's origin. Hall insisted that he had done nothing illegal at first, but investigators quickly started to piece the puzzle together. Because Hall had so much cash on him, they assumed he was implicated in the kidnapping of Greenlease. Hall eventually broke under pressure and admitted his involvement in the crime. However, the most startling discovery was still to come. When questioned about Bobby's whereabouts, he disclosed that the boy had passed away. He had not acted alone, Hall disclosed. A woman named Bonnie Hetty was his accomplice. They had come up with the idea to kidnap Bobby and demand a large ransom from his affluent parents. Investigators were able to piece together the events and discover the startling specifics of how the kidnapping took place, thanks to Hall's confession and a comprehensive background investigation. It was a network of treachery and deceit, with avarice at its core. It was discovered by authorities that Hall was from a wealthy family. He was a lawyer's son. He received a sizable inheritance and his parents' 1,100-acre Pleasanton, Kansas homestead after they died. However, Hall's life took a turn for the worst when he lost his riches, was divorced, and developed an addiction. When he was condemned to the Missouri State Penitentiary for robbing a cab driver of just $38.00, his life reached its lowest point. Hall recalled the rich Greenlease family when he dreamed of one huge score that would set him up for life while he was incarcerated. You see, Hall had learned about the family's fortune years earlier when he had gone to a military reform academy with Bobby's older adoptive half-brother, Paul. Hall quickly came up with a scheme to pay the ransom. The only thing left to do was figure out how to kidnap the youngster. Bonnie entered the picture at that point. Bonnie was a contradictory person. She continued to engage in prostitution and extravagant parties, even though she was the recipient of a substantial bequest from her father. She also appeared to be attracted to crooks. Her first spouse was a bank robber who was shot and killed by the police. She ended up inheriting a house from the divorce settlement, though, because her second marriage didn't work out any better. Bonnie first met Hall in the bar of the Hotel Robideau in St. Joseph, Missouri. Their fortuitous encounter signaled the start of a sinister and perverse collaboration, which could have been the result of fate or simply the cosmos coming into harmony. Hall gradually told Bonnie about his perverse plan over the course of the months, and to his relief, she was all too willing to join in. Thus, like 2 ravenous wolves pursuing their prey, Hall and Bonnie started following the Greenlease family in the summer of 1953. In an attempt to identify a vulnerability to take advantage of, they observed the family going about their everyday activities. They initially intended to kidnap the Greenlease's daughter, Sue, but they quickly came to the conclusion that Bobby, their 6-year-old son, would be a simpler target. The stage was prepared for the kidnapping that rocked the country to its foundation, because they understood they had to move quickly if they wanted to score the big score. Pretending to be Bobby's aunt, Bonnie had taken him up from school without causing any trouble. After that, Hall was waiting at a pharmacy when Bonnie and Bobby were dropped off. Hall took charge and led them to an empty field in Overland Park, Kansas, across state borders. Bobby was left alone with Hall, who had no intention of keeping him alive, after Bonnie exited the car and went a short distance. Hall initially attempted to kill Bobby with a piece of rope, but the rope was too short. Hall struck Bobby in the face, knocking out one of his teeth out of frustration and rage. Hall took out his .38 caliber revolver and shot Bobby at close range when he slumped to the floor of the automobile. After being kidnapped, Bobby did not live for more than half an hour. Both Hall and Bonnie realized they needed to remove the evidence after committing the horrible act. They wrapped Bobby's lifeless body in a trash bag and traveled to Bonnie's house in St. Joseph, Missouri. Then, in order to hide the smell of the corpse, they gently buried the bag in a grave that had been prepared in the backyard. They covered the bag with a lot of lime. In an attempt to pass the grave off as a flower garden, Hall then covered it with chrysanthemums. Now, Hall and Boney quickly fled to St. Louis across the state, as soon as they had the ransom money. Hall had bought 2 metal suitcases there to hide the cash. In addition, he and Boney discovered an apartment on Arsenal Street overlooking Tower Grove Park, where they reveled in their newfound wealth by drinking excessively. As the evening went on, Boney's intoxication finally overcame her, and she fell asleep. Hall had another plan, and this was the ideal time to implement it. He snuck out of the flat with the rest of the loot in the middle of the night, after placing $2,000, 0 cents, in Bonnie's purse. Hall then picked up a sex worker called Sandra O'Day on the taxi ride to the Coral Court Motel in Marlboro, Missouri. Before he was arrested, he intended to utilize Sandra's assistance to distract the police. Hall arranged for her to travel to Los Angeles so that he could mail the Greenlease family a letter he had written. By doing this, he would have diverted the police's attention. According to stories, Sandra was the one who reported the ransom money that Hall was carrying around to the police when she allegedly saw it. However, it's unclear if this is true or not. It is also thought that Hall purchased a shovel and 2 trash cans. In order to conceal the ransom money, he then rented a car and drove it to a location in St. Louis County along the Merrimack River. However, Hall kept the money with him since he was unable to locate a suitable place to bury the cans. Shortly after this, he was taken into custody. Police took immediate action after all of these revelations were made public. In the apartment where Hall had left her, Bonnie was found and taken into custody. They both faced the full weight of the law for their crimes after being charged with capital murder and kidnapping. Bobby's remains were found where they had been buried on October 7, 1953. Family members and neighbors came together to grieve the untimely death of this defenseless boy at a sad burial conducted at St. Agnes Catholic Church 2 days later, on October 9. As a victim of one of the most horrible murders in American history, Bobby was buried with sorrow and tears in his eyes. Since the crime had crossed state boundaries and was therefore a federal prosecution, punishment was swift for the 2 kidnappers. Hall and Bonnie entered a guilty plea to the accusations against them when they appeared in court on October 30, 1953. After only 1 hour and 8 minutes of deliberation, the jury recommended the death penalty. Hall and Bonnie accepted their fates on November 19, 1953, less than a month later, and neither attempted to challenge the decision. Just 81 days after the kidnapping, on December 18, 1953, they were both put to death in a Missouri gas chamber. Hall was 34 years old, and Bonnie was 41 when they passed away. There were several complexities in the aftermath of Bobby's kidnapping and death. The Greenlease family may have found closure with Hall and Bonnie's execution, but it also exposed a shocking truth. Now, just half of the ransom money was found when Hall was taken into custody. Unaccounted for was $312,000, 0 cents in total. The cops that arrested Hall, Patrolman Dolan, and Lieutenant Shoulders were suspected of stealing the missing funds. At first, though, they denied this, saying they had delivered all the cash to the police station. They ultimately faced federal charges and were found guilty of perjury. Shoulders received a sentence of 3 years in jail on April 15, 1954. Dolan, however, was sentenced to 2 years in prison. However, this was not the end of the story. Shoulders unexpectedly passed away in 1962. Shoulders and mob boss Joe Costello had actually stolen half of the ransom money, Dolan told the FBI after this. It wasn't until Shoulders and Costello were dead that Dolan finally told the truth. He had been too afraid to speak up earlier for fear of reprisals. In July 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson pardoned Dolan for his assistance. This was the conclusion of Bobby's tragic story. We are reminded when we consider the terrible events of 1953 that Bobby eventually received justice, albeit at a high price. We have to keep asking ourselves, how can we stop catastrophes like this from occurring again? What can we learn from Bobby's story, therefore? And how can we apply this understanding to create a society that is safer and more equitable for everyone? And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.